Lord of Industrialization. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction. So don't try any techniques you hear here in real life, your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 376 Where does the money come from? The morning sun illuminated the imperial capital, but the early summer sunshine failed to dispel the gloom that enveloped the residence. Emperor Ferdinand remained in a coma, relying on a tube of liquid food to keep him alive. No one knew when his lingering life would finally die. The city's nobles, both high and low, had recently secluded themselves, cultivating their bodies and minds to avoid potential trouble at this crucial moment of the succession. However, spies from various families were busy, transforming the area surrounding the palace gates into a restaurant district. News from within and outside the palace was now completely cut off. Even the daily food delivery carriages were swapped outside, and the workers who moved the goods wore gas masks, making it impossible to even glance at anyone outside. All that was known was that all the princes and princesses were inside. No one knew whether they were engaged in bloodshed or simply playing cards. The news that Duke Wessenland was coming to Wayne City was like a boulder dropped into calm water, causing an immediate uproar. Some said he was coming to help a certain heir eliminate a rival, while others said he had learned of the emperor's death first and arrived with his large army in white armor simply to offer condolences. The head of the Wessenland Association in Wayne quickly refuted the rumor, claiming the Duke of Wesson had merely invited several sculptors to Wesson via hot airship. The Duke himself hadn't arrived. Despite this claim, many were unconvinced. The spies had sparked a wave of economic development around the port area leased by the Wessenland Association. The next morning, 4 airships landed at the port, dropping off pilots from the previous night's red-eye flight. They rested at their booked hotel before returning to Wesson by boat, where they picked up several renowned sculptors and their assistants. Meanwhile, in the central square of Wessenberg, little Louis was stunned by the scene before him. The state parliament and various guilds had set up long tables in the square. Fatty recognized them as the same tables from the recent bond sale, belonging to the square management office. The difference was that today, they were filled with portraits as tall as a human being. These were bronze renderings created by other artists working overtime based on Frederick's overnight sketches. In front of each rendering stood a large box, with a long queue in front of it. Workers, farmers, merchants, students, clerks, doctors, teachers, and soldiers on leave lined up, dumping their copper coins, large and small, into the box, creating a clanging sound. Little Louis and Fatty, accompanied by their respective attendants, walked slowly along the edge of the square. Little Louis exclaimed in disbelief, "I never thought so many people would come to donate copper coins for the statue." Fatty, still apprehensive, said, "It's okay now. You weren't there when we were selling war bonds a while ago. I was terrified. I was afraid they'd mistake me for Franconia and beat me up because I was wearing a different style of clothing." Little Louis felt a sense of danger. Most local men wore simple, wide-toed leather shoes, straight-leg pants, shirts, vests, and jackets. The older men wore bowler hats, while the younger men favored peaked caps. Little Louis and his group were dressed in the traditional style of the Kingdom of Gallia, embroidered shoes, white tights reaching to the knees, waistcoats intricately embroidered on the front, and long, unbuttoned coats. Everything was made of dark fabric with light embroidery. They had caused this disturbance. What if someone recognized them and threw stones in a fit of rage? More and more people gathered in the square. The security staff extended the queuing ropes and began setting up signs indicating the entrances and exits. "This is terrible." Little Louis felt a cold sweat break out on his back. "I feel like so many things here defy common sense." Fatty nodded. In the past, only during festivals like the New Year and free performances could such a large number of civilians gather. Getting them to spontaneously buy bonds and donate was something they could only dream of. They all wanted to emulate Frederick's governance, but the more they learned, the more they found themselves baffled by the operation. The only thing they understood was that they needed a lot of money to accomplish these tasks. The question was, where would Duke Wesson get the money? Both pondered the same question as they left the square with their entourage, walking aimlessly. The streets were bustling with people. Children on summer vacation were strolling and playing in groups, many of them gathered at the newsstand that also sold drinks. Those with more change bought bottles of ice-cold happy water, while those with less could only afford a glass of maltose water. They tore off the sterilized label on the cup, drank slowly, and returned the cup. Behind the newsstand was a mirror shop. The window displayed mirrors ranging from full-length mirrors to pocket-sized makeup mirrors. These mirrors were all made in the Duchy of Mainz, with luxurious rims. When Fatty and little Louis reached the mirror shop, they simultaneously stopped and turned to look in the window. A full-length mirror revealed their own reflections clearly. It seemed as if the previous question had been answered. Suddenly, they were startled as the face of a giant appeared in the mirror. The giant towered over Fatty and little Louis by a head, his face thick with flesh, his body muscular like a bear's. He wore brown leather pants and bearskin boots, a black leather vest over a blue shirt, a thorny thorn bush on his head, and a small gilded axe studded with gems hung from his waist. Fatty's bodyguard, Håkon, and Prince Moritz, who guarded little Louis, kept a close eye on him, ready to strike at any sign of trouble. The air around them instantly felt much cooler. The giant remained calm under the subtle pressure of these two top human warriors, speaking politely in standard Poland, the common language of the nobility. "Excuse me, I am Kostorf from the Kingdom of Sviri. May I ask if you are His Majesty Fatty of the Gazi Empire and His Highness Louis of the Kingdom of Gaul?" Fatty didn't know where the Kingdom of Sviri was, but judging by the golden axe, he knew this man was of high status and nodded slightly. Little Louis immediately saluted. "Your Majesty, so it's His Majesty Kostorf. On behalf of my father, I extend warm greetings to you." He then introduced Fatty. "This is His Majesty Kostorf, King of the Kingdom of Sviri, from the land of ice and forest in the north." The dark land was just a common term used by southerners. The more pleasant land of ice and forest was used in formal occasions. Upon hearing they were traveling together, Fatty formally exchanged greetings. He planned to see many places on this trip, and had already agreed to visit little Louis next. It would be nice to go further north, as no one in the Gazi Empire had ever seen the sun rise and set for days. Kostorf, with a menacing smile on his face, said to little Louis, "I'm just a businessman here on business. No need for formalities." Fatty, finding him quite his type, nodded and said, "Yes, let's get along like friends here. I know a nice tea house nearby. Why don't we go there and chat?" Kostorf, who had come with the intention of building connections, naturally agreed. Little Louis thought about it. The Kingdom of Sviri, located south of the Dark Land, had frequently crossed the sea to attack the Kingdom of Danmar in recent years, and there were also pirates plundering the Rhine Confederation and the northern coastal areas east of the Elbe River. So he agreed. Fatty suddenly realized that there were many foreigners like him who sent money to Frederick. Chapter 377, Exploring the Northern Market. The increasing number of foreign friends attending the expo provided an opportunity for previously unseen factions, sparking countless plots and schemes in Wesson state. With Duke Wesson's rise to regional dominance, the influence of the Osmoga Empire has dwindled significantly, prompting the smaller nobles of the northern forests and oceans to consider a new leader. Being a leader is not an easy task. Receiving tributes is fine, but in critical moments, one must step up and help manage household chores. In the Great Forest, there lived an old earl with one son and two daughters. His estate owned a tin mine. His daughters were twins, married to nearby nobles, each with a daughter. This spring, the earl and his son's family were traveling when they encountered a mudslide, but they survived unscathed. Maternal mortality rates are high in this remote region, and the two daughters died young. Now, the inheritance of the estate rests with the two granddaughters. Normally, the granddaughter of the elder sister inherits the title, but a fight erupted over whose mother was the elder sister. They all eventually came up with a plan to seek the Duke of Wesson's support. However, their fiefdoms were impoverished, their knights combined couldn't even afford a football team. As for money, no one within a few hundred miles dared discuss it with the Duke of Wesson. Their only assets were their relatively young and beautiful bodies. Many viewed this as a barometer of Frederick's foreign policy, wondering if he would compromise or lean towards one side. The aristocratic community was abuzz with discussion, and even Fatty, Louis Jr., and Kostorf, who were visiting the vegetable greenhouse demonstration base, couldn't help but discuss the matter. Louis Jr. said to the two national leaders, "If it were me, I'd have them each make their own bid, then give each other a little information to maximize their profits. and then choose the one with the highest bid. Fatty and Kosdorf exchanged a glance and burst into laughter. Since Kosdorf joined, he and Fatty had found a new passion, politically maneuvering to undermine Louis Jr. Little Louis was very dissatisfied and felt that most of their theories were heretical. But when he thought about it carefully, it seemed that his father had handled similar issues in the same way. But he could not lose his dignity even if he lost the battle. He said unconvincedly, "Then how will you deal with this matter to solve it perfectly?" Fatty smiled and said seriously, "I choose the one with big breasts." Kosdorf also said seriously, "I choose the one with a big butt." After hearing this, little Louis' face was distorted. He felt that he had been fooled. He said angrily, "What kind of crooked theory is this? How can we treat national affairs as a joke?" Fatty and Kosdorf laughed together again. Kosdorf said, "It makes no essential difference to me which one I support, so why not have some fun with it?" Fatty continued, "You'll understand when you become king. There are so many things to deal with all day long. It would be tiring to think carefully about each one. Small things like this are easy to deal with." Kosdorf nodded in agreement, pinching his chin and saying, "Which one will Wesson choose?" "I think he will definitely choose the one with a big butt." Fatty also pinched his chin and said, "He will definitely choose the one with big breasts." Speaking of Wesson, here comes Wesson. The Wesson state government has been very busy lately. On the one hand, it has to welcome guests from all over the world, and on the other hand, it has to expand its scale and split one person into several people. The Church of Nature moved quickly. Frederick brought guests from afar to visit the greenhouse today. When he saw the three of them, he asked the guests to wait and came over to say hello. Fatty and Kosdorf looked at Frederick from the left and right, asking him the question seriously. "Friedrich Steelja von Wesson, it doesn't matter. Oh, we both have the same, calcium oxide." Fatty and Kosdorf gave him a thumbs up. Little Louis took a step back. He was a gentleman and would not associate with this kind of beast. After inviting them to attend the Golden Durian Award ceremony of the Wesson Science Society the day after tomorrow, Frederick walked back to the guests. Kosdorf stared at Frederick's guests for a long time without saying a word. Fatty noticed it and looked at the man. The man was very tall, about 1.8 meters, wearing an emerald green long dress. The silver leather armor on the upper body outlined some feminine features. He wore a long emerald green headscarf on his head, covering his face. He also wore a thorn ring on his head, similar to Kosdorf's. At first glance, it looked like a green plant, but if you look closely, you will find that it exudes a metallic luster. Fatty asked Kosdorf, "Who are you from?" Kosdorf sighed and said, "The Aurora Warriors of the Church of Nature." Fatty nodded, thinking that the Aurora Warriors were an armed group affiliated with the church, just like the Red Flame monks of his own Church of Fire, the Paladins of the Church of Light here, and the Stone Warriors of the Cult of the Earth in the far west. Little Louis asked Kosdorf curiously, "Why did you sigh just now? Is your lover an Aurora Warrior?" Then he whispered to Fatty, "Aurora Warriors are all women." Fatty felt he understood, and immediately imagined a million-word touching story of childhood sweethearts, a handsome man and a beautiful woman, their mutual love, and ultimately being separated by secular and religious forces. Kosdorf smiled bitterly and said, "I wonder if she is my daughter." Fatty's mind immediately added a million words of searching for relatives, misunderstandings, and reuniting. Little Louis wasn't much better off. He volunteered to ask Kosdorf, "Would you like me to find out for you?" Kosdorf simply shook his head and said, "Thanks, but no thanks. There are some things you don't understand." The two men gave up. Elsewhere, Frederick led a guest into a greenhouse where red eggplants were growing, their flowers just beginning to bloom. In the corner stood a beehive for pollination. Frederick introduced the guests, "Sister Walkiuli, this is the greenhouse where you can grow vegetables during the winter." The northern female warrior, named Walkiuli, surveyed the greenhouse with curiosity, asking questions about watering, fertilizing, and pest control. Frederick, somewhat surprised, remarked, "You know quite a bit about farming." Walkiuli calmly replied, "When we were young and old and couldn't bear arms, there were still those who couldn't bear arms who cultivated the land." Frederick nodded, understanding that the Aurora Warriors would likely face a difficult time after retirement. A greenhouse would greatly improve their lives. He said, "Greenhouse cultivation requires some skills. You can send someone to learn." Walkiuli asked, "How much is the tuition?" Frederick replied, "No tuition." He felt the other person's eyes fixed on him from beneath the veil, as if he were lying or had ulterior motives. A few days ago, the Wesson Daily had reported on the education industry. Anyone with an eye could tell that the schools in Oak City provided a significant tax revenue, significantly boosting consumption. Walkie-Uli, knowing this, felt there was no reason to pass up the opportunity to make money. Could there be some other ulterior motive? So she asked Frederick, any conditions? She didn't know that in Frederick's eyes, once the Church of Nature decided to build greenhouses, the market for materials, fertilizer, and seeds would open up, and the tuition would be a piece of cake. Frederick, looking at the female warrior before him, pondered. The Wesson Army would expand its corps of female pilots, medics, and other soldiers in the future. Currently, female martial arts were underdeveloped, and it seemed like they could learn from these female warriors, who had inherited the tradition for millennia. The zoo was also short of northern animals. He figured it wouldn't be a problem to ask these warriors to capture some alive. Before Frederick could say anything, Walkie-Uli declared, I understand. Her words were as emotionless as before, as cold as the northern snow. Frederick paused, then asked curiously, what do you know? Walkie-Uli hesitated, then said, don't worry. The Pope made it clear before I left. I volunteered for this mission. Frederick felt something was amiss, but after a moment's thought, he gave it up. He still had much else to do. It's still early, he said, taking out his pocket watch and checking it. Let's go for a walk. Walkie-Uli paused, then finally agreed. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 378 Foreign Policy. As the sun went down, it was time for dinner. Walkie-Uli returned to the hometown association's residence with 4 fully loaded tricycles, while Frederick also returned to the castle for dinner. At the table, Frederick noticed Maria looking at him from time to time, then lowering her head and grinning mischievously. Frederick asked her curiously, what's wrong? Maria just laughed, hey, and didn't answer. Now they both had their own work and studies during the day, and only had time to spend together at night. After dinner, as the two were leaving the restaurant, Frederick suddenly attacked and picked up Maria horizontally. Maria screamed in fright and hurriedly said, put me down, someone's watching. Frederick coughed twice, and the maids and guards in the corridor turned to face the wall, stifling their laughter. Maria was embarrassed and angry, and raised her fist to hit Frederick. Frederick didn't care, carrying her into the entertainment room and closing the door with his foot. This was their usual place to relax and play. There was a ping-pong table and a billiard table. A variety of chess pieces filled the cabinets next to the chess table. A disassembled Rubik's Cube sat on the coffee table in front of the sofa. The bookshelves were filled with casual reading materials like novels, travel logs, and poetry. Frederick sat on the sofa, holding Maria in his arms. Maria reached out and squeezed his cheeks vigorously, her lips pouting red enough to hang on a keychain. It was unknown when the two young people's lips began to connect, their tongues moving constantly. Because Maria insisted, they only moved their lips for now. It was unknown how long it took before they sat back down. Maria moved Frederick to rest her head on her lap, pinched his nose, and asked with a sly smile, hey, are you really going to sleep with Baron Ivan von Catfield and Baron Ivan von Catfield, or both of them? Frederick asked helplessly. How did you know? Maria now frequently participated in the activities of the Ladies and Ladies Intelligence Circle. The information in this circle was transmitted rapidly, sometimes accurate, sometimes extremely ridiculous. Their primary function was to pass on information, the accuracy of which needed to be verified with family members. Frederick's romantic scandals were frequently trending in the social circles, mostly groundless, but that didn't stop everyone from using them as gossip and, with Maria, teasing the individuals involved. This time, the incident had become quite a big deal, with political implications involved, and many people were asking Maria about it. Maria pinched Frederick's nose again and asked, answer quickly. Is it true? Frederick said dejectedly, those 3 guys are so talkative. He had only mentioned the rumor that he wanted both of them that morning to Fatty, Kosdorf, and little Louis, and hadn't expected it to spread so quickly. He mused, if they both wash up together and wait for me in the same bed, I won't let their efforts go to waste. Maria punched Frederick in the stomach and said, who cares how many you sleep with at once? Now everyone wants to know who you support and why. She had known from childhood that Frederick had a lover. One of them, Susan, had come to live with them years ago. That was the social norm, Unless there was a succession crisis, no one would bother. Frederick raised his hand and gently stroked her black hair, saying seriously, I am willing to exchange and do business with all friendly countries and nobles under the principles of mutual respect for power and territorial integrity, mutual non-aggression, non-interference in each other's internal affairs, equality and mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence. We may seem strong now, but our strength has been diluted by the newly annexed territories. We need to concentrate our efforts on rectifying our internal affairs. There are still many bandits in the former Duchy of Franconia and the Regents League who need to be cleaned up, and we have no energy to take care of external political affairs. I have an idea. Next year, we will establish an Elbe Treaty Organization with a business-oriented approach for the regions on both sides of the Elbe River. We will strengthen commercial and construction cooperation in various places and work together to achieve common development and prosperity. Well, let me add one more thing. The children of nobles who join this organization can come to our civil service professional and technical college for pre-exam education classes. If they pass the civil service exam, they can also work here or serve in the army. That's all for now. After listening, Maria asked, are you planning to recruit their second son? As the future First Lady of the Duchy of Wesson, she had received some political education, with Psyche occasionally giving her pointers while teaching her soul magic. Now, with her keen political sense, she noticed something different. The lack of inheritance rights among the nobility had always been a problem. These individuals, having received what was considered an education in that era, represented a talent pool, and Frederick had his sights set on them. Besides attracting talent, this approach would also deepen Frederick's relationships with other nobles. Such connections might prove useful in the future. Frederick nodded and pinched Maria's nose, confirming her statement. Maria pondered. Everyone knows that civil servants and military personnel here are well paid, and many in the Duchy of Mainz share this interest. Her meaning was clear. She wanted Frederick to extend this policy to the nobles of his homeland as well. Frederick thought for a moment, then smiled and said, spread the word first. Let them talk to you, and then you can talk to me. Maria leaned over and kissed him gently. This was a way to increase her voice in the circle. Some things had to be done in the first place, and doing them after you told them was two different things in the eyes of others. How do we solve that problem? Maria pinched his nose again. Even if you sleep with them together, the inheritance of the territory still needs to be decided. Everyone is interested in your decision, Frederick said nonchalantly. Let them find someone to marry quickly. One has a boy, the other has a girl. Then the children can get married, and their descendants will inherit the territory. His words were pure compromise, mainly procrastination, showing that he did not interfere in other people's internal affairs. Maria said worriedly, you're probably going to deter those families who want to join us. People seek help from Big Brother to sort things out. Even if Frederick simply puffed both of them and said he was helping her because she was more pliable, everyone would accept his rules and play by them. Now he's clearly saying you should handle this on your own, without any help. Who would come to pay their respects? Frederick's lips curled slightly, and he whispered, a family with whom we have a good relationship might have weapons growing out of the trees outside their homes. Don't tell anyone about this yet, it's not the time yet. Maria covered her mouth with a sly grin and said, you're so mean. After this, Maria pinched Frederick's face and asked, are you going to take Walkie-Ulai as your lover? Frederick blinked, puzzled, and asked, who told you that? Walkie-Ulai had just arrived yesterday, having first sought an introduction from Psyche. As the Church of Nature's plenipotentiary envoy and the key figure in opening the northern market, Frederick naturally treated her with courtesy, intent on making money and never thinking of her as a person. Maria poked his cheek and said, you went shopping with her today and bought her a lot of things. Frederick remembered that he had bought 4 carts of things for Walkie-Ulai today, and since he hadn't concealed his identity, he thought someone must have seen it and spread the word. You're talking about that, he smiled. I'm asking Walkie-Ulai for help. The dark land in the north is a huge market, but the unique climate and geographical conditions mean that the industrial products we can use here may not be suitable there, so targeted improvements are needed. I've looked for Kosdorf, but this guy thought I was selling. He kept finding fault and trying to lower the price. According to his standards, the down jacket can be worn on the moon, so I asked Walkie-Ulai for help to see if those things are suitable for them. The samples are considered as remuneration. This is not a big deal. Frederick thought about it and said to Maria, there's something. When you go to see your godfather recently, Tell him that I plan to build a railway directly to the Helvetic Federation to make it more convenient for those mountain people who come to work here," Maria agreed. Now the Grand Duke of Mainz still stays at the cathedral construction site every day. Apart from anything else, he is competent as a supervisor to look at the drawings to find construction quality problems and strictly enforce safe and civilized construction. Frederick was worried he'd be tired, but he'd become more energetic the more he worked. Even at 80, he still had the energy to find a lover in her 30s, leaving his family speechless. After finishing their business, the two men began discussing what they'd wear to the Golden Durian Awards ceremony the following evening. Chapter 379 Double Happiness. The morning sun illuminated the streets of Nuremberg, and the city stretched itself, gradually awakening. Once one of the largest cities in the Southern Rhine Confederation, it was seized by Frederick 8 years ago, but due to its reluctance to govern, it failed to reap the benefits of development. Its once proud glass-making industry was relocated to Zerndorf, over 20 kilometers to the west. The burgeoning wool textile and dyeing industry was relocated to the Ratibor district to the south, and the transportation hubs became Wessenland and Oak City. While their neighbors prospered, they stagnated. Today, the city's only pride lies in the Wesen Medical School, the world's largest medical education and research institution. A small minority of its professors hail from the family of Lady Sophie of Kusch, while the majority are outstanding, skilled, and even epic doctors from around the world, attracted by Frederick's bacterial hypothesis, his microscope, the compilation of local manuals of common diseases, and the generous salaries he offered. In a house in a residential area near the medical school, Mrs. is knocked on the door of a second-floor tenant's room and said loudly but calmly, "Miss Florence, it's time to get up." Mrs. was a local. Her husband, a peddler, had been caught in a trafficker's business more than a decade earlier and never returned. She had since raised her children by renting rooms and working as a servant for tenants. A muffled response echoed from within the room, followed by silence. As usual, Mrs. pulled a 10-minute hourglass from her pocket and began counting, calling out again when the time was up. Florence finally sat up in bed, dazed for a few minutes, then suddenly remembered what day it was. Outside, Mrs. turned the hourglass over again. When it was empty again, she went in to comb Florence's hair. Suddenly, a chaotic noise erupted from the room. Florence remembered that she had to travel to Wessenland today to attend the Wesen Science Society's Golden Durian Award ceremony. She had to catch the train, so she needed to prepare her travel clothes, the evening dress, and jewelry for the ceremony. She opened her closet, but the riding clothes she'd worn on her previous trip were gone. The white dress she'd worn that evening and the silk-embroidered shawl from Constantia he'd given her were also missing. Could there have been a thief? Bang! Florence's little toe accidentally kicked against the suitcase next to the closet, and the pain jolted her awake. She then remembered that she'd packed her travel belongings the night before, and her riding clothes were already hanging on the coat hook. Mrs. had already entered the room, and she felt a little helpless at the sight. She was already in her 20s, her son could already speak when she was her age, yet she was still a bit reckless. She helped Florence comb her long hair, braid it, and change her clothes. Her daughter was already preparing breakfast in the dining room on the first floor. Florence was in charge of nurse education at the medical school, and her salary allowed her to have a good standard of food. Breakfast consisted of boiled eggs, bread with blueberry jam, cereal rings with milk, and grilled sausages. After breakfast, she packed her suitcase and left to tell Mrs. that she would be staying at her father's for 2 days before returning to Wessenland. The train from Nuremberg to Wessenland took 2 or 3 hours, and if she wanted to catch dinner at her father's house, she would have to take the 8 o'clock train. Florence had asked Mrs. to order a tricycle from the car dealership yesterday. There was a noise outside the door just now, and it seemed the car had arrived. When she opened the door, there was no tricycle, but a dark purple unicorn. Beside it stood a knight in the black cavalry officer's uniform. Children from the neighborhood were feeding the unicorn with malt sugar, candied fruit, or vegetable leaves. They looked as skilled as they did when feeding the dawn at the zoo. Florence was overjoyed and asked happily, "When did you get back?" Jurgen smiled and replied, "We've been back a long time. Before the war, command had been wary of complacency and had secretly redeployed the cavalry guard regiment stationed near Constantinople. Originally intended to serve as a covert assault force in reserve, it was ultimately assigned only to the task of capturing surrendered cities. Now that the war was over and new troops had been dispatched, Jurgen and his men returned to expand and reorganize the regiment. Jurgen bowed to Florence like a gentleman and said, "Where are you going, my beautiful lady? I wonder if I could offer you a ride on your journey." That afternoon, Frank, the Minister of Health of the Wesson state, paced restlessly in his dining room. In the kitchen, he had reheated his daughter's favorite dishes several times, and the servants had gone to the train station several times to check for her, but she was nowhere to be seen. Frank couldn't help but wonder if Florence had been abducted along the way. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the butler hurried into the dining room and said to the master with a hint of excitement, "Master, the young lady is back." Frank couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief, his feet aching slightly. The butler continued, "The young lady has brought a man back." This time it was Frank's turn to get excited. "Give me my knife." The roar could be heard clearly in the corridor. Jurgen instinctively shrank his neck and turned to ask Florence, "I haven't heard that your father can fight." Florence held his left arm with her right hand, her left hand covering her mouth with a smirk. "He can use a scalpel," she said. "Back before we came to Wesson County, he stabbed a thief over 100 times, and he looked like he had been pulled out of a pool of blood and could still run for several blocks." Even though Jurgen had followed Frederick into battle since he was 19 and had fought almost every battle until now, his reputation resonating throughout the inner sea, even now, his feet were trembling. Frank waited in the living room. Though he was pleased his daughter, now older, had finally brought a man home, he still had to be polite. When Florence led Jurgen into the living room, Frank held a gleaming scalpel in one hand and a cotton swab in the other, carefully wiping it with alcohol. Jurgen was a little nervous. He'd seen this kind of scalpel before from the medics. Though the detachable blade was no bigger than a thumb and as thin as paper, it was made of the finest materials. It could easily cut through skin and muscle without catching blood or fat. He wondered how many fools had gotten bloody hands trying it with their fingers. Florence pulled him over to her father and introduced him with a beaming smile. "Father, this is my boyfriend, Jurgen." Frank knew Jurgen, having attended meetings together before, so Florence limited her introduction to his new identity. Frank glanced up at Jurgen and gestured for him to sit on the small sofa next to him. Jurgen sat upright, as if Frederick were in a meeting. Florence sat down next to her father. Frank looked at him and asked, as if he were a doctor, "How long has this been going on?" "Report," Jurgen thought, subconsciously, as if he were reporting military intelligence, but quickly recovered. "Miss Florence and I fell in love 4 years ago, during a joint exercise between our cavalry regiment and the medical school." He spent over 10 minutes recounting how, drawn by lot, he had been sent to a field hospital as a wounded soldier during that exercise, and how Florence had meticulously bandaged him, and how their friendship had gradually deteriorated during that time. Frank listened calmly, nodding calmly, as if a patient had described his ailment as a minor problem that could be cured with a little hot water. Jurgen was relieved to see that he didn't object. Frank was still quite satisfied with Jurgen. He was a prominent figure among the Duke of Wesson's vassals, had no bad reputations, and was about the same age as his daughter. If his daughter was fine, so was he. He nodded slightly, and felt his daughter's grip on his arm tighten a little. He turned and asked, "Are you ready?" Florence's face flushed suddenly, and she lowered her head and said, "We originally planned to tell you last year, but he had to go to Constantine and only came back yesterday." Frank shook his head and said, "I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about your acceptance speech tonight." Florence looked at her father in confusion, her head full of question marks, and asked, "What award?" Frank saw that she seemed to be really unaware, so he said, "The Golden Durian Award, didn't you know?" Florence asked her father blankly, "Am I not attending the ceremony as a representative of the medical school?" Frank asked her, "Didn't you know that your Annals of Maternal and Newborn Nursing won the Golden Durian Mathematics Award?" Florence's head was filled with more question marks. "If I were to win an award, it would be a medical award. How could it be a mathematics award?" Frank didn't know where the message went wrong, so he said, "That's absolutely true. Think about your acceptance speech quickly, so you don't get so nervous that you can't speak." Chapter 380 Awards Ceremony, Part 1. The first 4 Golden Durian Award ceremonies of the Wesson Science Society were held in the auditorium of the University of Wessenberg. In addition to the award winners, the attendees were mostly scholars. Since traveling long distances was inconvenient, the number of attendees was small, and the auditorium was adequate. On August 8, 1034, the 5th Golden Durian Awards ceremony, postponed for more than half a month, coincided with the first World Expo to expand its influence and visibility. Psyche invited many dignitaries and businessmen from various countries, so the venue was arranged in a football field north of Wessenberg. Frank, Florence, and Jurgen had an early dinner, changed into formal attire, and arrived at the venue in the family carriage. Since Diesel's research shifted from air guns to implosion engines and achieved great success, various new modes of transportation have proliferated in Wessenberg. Frank had always envied his master's carriages since he was a child, so even now, as Minister of Medicine, with a van gifted by Frederick, he still traveled by carriage. Frank urged the driver several times along the way. Jurgen was tempted to just start with a van, but he held back. A stage was set up in the middle of the football field. In front of it were small round tables, each seating 3 or 4 VIPs. The audience seats beyond were open to the general public. In front of the stage was the orchestra pit, where the Wesson family's newly formed symphony orchestra, using modern instruments, played soothing music. Frederick's table was in the center of the front row, with royals and the evening's award winners roaming around on either side, alternating between the two groups. Florence was a bit dazed when she was led to her seat. To her right were Duke Wesson, Master Psyche, and Miss Ertl, and to her left was His Majesty Fatih of the Ghazi Empire. Only then did she realize she was about to go up to receive her award. Frederick had already arrived and, upon seeing Jurgen arrive with Florence, immediately seized him for questioning. Meanwhile, Fatih nodded to Florence. Fatih only brought Hakan with him tonight. Hakan had just gone to chat and network with the other winners, and upon returning, he reported to his superiors. Currently, the Golden Durian Awards offer 6 categories: magic, alchemy, mathematics, physics, biology, and medicine. Aside from the first year, when a large number of awards were given, each category has, in principle, only one winner each year, preferring to have fewer than one. The influence of an award lies not on the amount of the prize money, but in the quality of the research. Under Psyche's supervision, the winning results over the years have consistently represented major breakthroughs in their respective fields. The quality of the awards has, in just a few years, been widely recognized by industry professionals and has become a benchmark for research. Half of this year's 6 awards went to people from Wesson State. Hakan went to connect with the other 4 winners, and Fatih will visit them in a few days. As they chatted, the guests and audience arrived, the time had arrived, and the music changed from soothing to the usual red carpets played at the company's annual meetings. Psyche rose from her seat and took the stage. Tonight, she wore a red silk gown embroidered with gold thread, a purple silk sash at her waist, and a purple gold olive leaf tiara. She stepped onto the stage and began her speech, offering warm congratulations to all the award winners, extending her highest respect and sincere greetings to the scientific community, and expressing her heartfelt gratitude to the domestic and international guests attending the awards ceremony. Her fame was limited to the upper echelons of academia, especially after years spent traveling the Far East and, upon her return, posing as a student in Constantinople, leaving her virtually unknown. With Frederick's rapid rise, she too began to attract attention. After a brief welcome speech, Psyche handed the stage over to Frederick, who looked dashing in his white, double-breasted Air Force officer's dress uniform and peaked hat. In his speech, Frederick noted that, despite a complex and challenging domestic and international environment, the state of Wesson had achieved remarkable economic success over the past year, a feat inseparable from the fruitful achievements in science and technology. A number of landmark achievements have emerged and are rapidly being translated into practical applications, leading to a flourishing entrepreneurial scene. This land, brimming with vitality and a vibrant landscape, is experiencing a vibrant and dynamic development driven by innovation. Currently, a new round of technological and industrial transformation is brewing, and the Wesson state is entering a new phase of profound economic restructuring. Innovation must be placed at the core of overall development. Guided by the new development philosophy and focusing on expanding production and increasing income, we must thoroughly implement an innovation-driven development strategy, accelerate the cultivation and expansion of a research workforce comprised primarily of scholars, professionals, skilled workers, and agricultural technicians, and drive sustained rapid economic growth. Frederick emphasized that to comprehensively enhance scientific and technological innovation capabilities, we must focus on cutting-edge research, closely aligned with demand, and proactively deploy strategies. We must strengthen basic theoretical research and innovation, focusing on promoting major projects, engineering projects, and infrastructure development. We must establish a long-term, stable, win-win mechanism, encourage joint innovation led by enterprises and guided by the market, improve the efficiency of research results translation, and ensure that society, enterprises, and researchers all benefit from innovation. Frederick stated that this is a land of inclusiveness, supporting both local talent to strive for excellence and foreign talent to start businesses and innovate, providing greater space for them to display their talents. We will further strengthen intellectual property protection and maintain a high-pressure crackdown on infringement and counterfeiting. After his speech, the candidates in the audience, who were taking the civil service exam next month, felt a little nervous. Judging by the timing, the spirit of tonight's speech might well be reflected in the essay questions. Psyche then announced the start of the award ceremony, starting with a mathematics prize. First to take the stage was Fatty, the award presenter. He was dressed in a formal purple imperial robe and a ruby-studded flaming crown on his head. He spoke in Purin. My friends all know that when pushed to the limit, people can do anything, except math, amidst the laughter of the audience. He continued, in my past, I believed that math was only useful for calculating how much land I owned, whether taxes had increased, and how many days of military rations I would have to endure. It wasn't until I saw the minutes of maternal and newborn nursing in a bookstore that I realized I was wrong. Before I became emperor, the most respected person in my realm wasn't me, but a midwife, because she had to deliver 50 babies before an adult or child died. At the time, I had someone investigate, and they found that in my realm, one child died for every 20 births. 25 out of 100 newborns didn't survive to the age of 1, and fewer than 60 made it to the age of 12. Even in the palace, my father had 15 children, but only 10 made it to the age of 1. And 2 of those didn't even make it to the full moon or new moon. For countless years, people have searched for ways to prevent infant mortality. When I was born, my grandmother followed a traditional method of soaking my navel down in a potion for a whole day to prevent my belly button from ulcerating. But my twin brother died 2 months later. I've also heard of a method where a newborn baby and their wet nurse have to live in a house surrounded by flames, with a fire burning all around them until the full moon. There are many different methods, but no one can clearly explain what can be done to ensure that the world's children and their mothers live longer. Miss Florence answered this question. She spent 5 years visiting countless places, accumulating a wealth of data, analyzing it mathematically, and providing the answer through easy-to-understand tables and colorful graphs. Among sick children, lung disease accounted for 59.25% of the incidence, with a mortality rate of 30%. Various infections accounted for 29% of the incidence, with a mortality rate of nearly 80%. The leading cause of maternal death was puerperal infection, followed by heavy bleeding. We all know how valuable a direction and a goal are when exploring unknown territory. We may not have solved all our problems yet, but Miss Florence's achievements have pointed us to our greatest goal and shown us where to focus our efforts. I worked so hard to secure the right to present Miss Florence with the award, because I want to show everyone with concrete actions that her achievements transcend national boundaries and religions and are the most precious treasure of all humanity. After the translator finished translating Fada's award speech, thunderous applause erupted in the venue, lasting nearly 5 minutes. Florence appeared dazed as she took the stage, as if she were walking on clouds, cautiously, as if the slightest effort would cause her to fall, crashing onto the bed and realizing it was all a dream. A staff member stood behind Fada, holding a tray. On it lay a half-pound hollow, gold-plated silver durian, a Wesson bank check for 1,000 florins, and a gold durian badge to pin on her chest. Florence's hands trembled as she took the tray from Fada. Facing the audience, she took a deep breath for half a minute before speaking in a trembling voice. I feel like I'm dreaming. Please allow me to calm down a bit. After several deep breaths, she continued, I owe the fact that I'm here today to Duke Wesson. As His Majesty Fada just said, the most important thing when sailing on the ocean of knowledge is the goal, otherwise, no wind is favorable. Duke Wesson is a beacon on the sea. 10 years ago, he pointed the way to integrating mathematics and medicine. Frederick, in the audience, simply smiled. He had impressed Frank and Florence with this idea at the refugee camp, so technically, the award should have been his. However, it was Florence who truly implemented the idea, integrating statistics and medicine into a new discipline, and applying and refining it in practical practice. She was well deserved to receive the award. Chapter 381 Awards Ceremony, Part 2. Florence burst into tears of joy as she returned to her seat, holding the tray. She covered her face with her hands, tears dripping from between her fingers. The Alchemy Award was then presented to Fritz, Dean of the Alchemy Institute at the University of Wessenland. Frederick returned to the stage and began a relatively brief award speech. Since I was a child, I've wondered why meat cooks when heated. No one in the castle could answer this question, and it remains unanswered. While we don't know why meat cooks, that doesn't stop us from using this phenomenon in cooking. I've had a superficial understanding of alchemy. It's an ever-changing science. When various substances are combined, they undergo different transformations. Atomic theory holds that all matter in the world is composed of atoms. Different atoms combine to form a wide variety of molecules, which can decompose and combine, undergoing countless variations. While conducting experiments, I couldn't help but wonder what the underlying principle of these transformations is. I have a hypothesis. Do atoms have hands on their surfaces? A bonding reaction is like holding hands, while a decomposition reaction is like the hands releasing. These hands can't remain empty. After releasing, they reconnect according to certain principles. This year's Golden Durian Alchemy Award will be awarded to Mr. Fritz, author of The Catalytic and Passivating Effects of Magical Elements in Alchemy. He studied the role of different magical elements in alchemical reactions and provided theoretical guidance for changing alchemical conditions. I'm certain that, 1,000 years from now, when we've all turned to dust, Mr. Fritz's achievements will still appear on students' exams. Just now, as I walked onto the stage, an idea suddenly occurred to me. According to Mr. Fritz's theory, does the catalyst affect the hands of atoms? Fritz quickly took the stage after Frederick's speech. He was wearing a cotton lab coat and cap, 2 pens with black and red ink, and a pencil in his breast pocket, as if he wasn't here to accept an award but to conduct an experiment. This is a tradition among Wesson State Award winners. If Florence had known she was going to receive an award today, she would have definitely worn her nurse's uniform. After accepting the tray from Frederick, Fritz began his acceptance speech. The principal just gave me a difficult question. This bold hypothesis makes sense, but without careful verification, I can't conclude whether it's correct. For thousands of years, countless alchemists have sought ways to create gold from inexpensive materials, and they've achieved many things besides gold. Times have changed. I believe alchemists shouldn't remain obsessed with gold, because there are many things more valuable than gold. This year, Fritz's achievement was considered too advanced to be displayed. After all, it was a technique that reduced the pressure of ammonia synthesis to several atmospheres. Back in Frederick's hometown, he'd probably be awarded a Nobel Prize, so only a brief summary was made public. On stage, Fritz spoke eloquently about how alchemists could make money. In the audience, his old friend, Monarts, the new Minister of Industry for the state of Wesson, nervously recited his acceptance speech. Ahmet teased him, "It's not your first time winning an award, don't be so nervous." Monaltz nervously replied, "This is my first and second time winning an award." He had won the Alchemy Award the previous 2 years for his technique in smelting magic metals, but his work was too advanced to be displayed. This year, he had thought he'd win another Alchemy Award for his new work, but unexpectedly, at the last minute, the Alchemy Award went to Fritz. After temporarily extracting the core of his work as Psyche suggested, he won the Magic Award. Monaltz had no objection. Winning the Golden Durian Award in 2 fields was naturally even better. After Fritz left the stage, Psyche took the stage to present the Magic Awards. She said, "For thousands of years, countless magicians have devoted themselves to studying the interaction between magical elements and matter, achieving a series of results, such as the theory of viscosity (MR). Monaltz, in the relationship between electric magic and static electricity, proposed a new theory based on his study of the relationship between the two. The interaction between magical and material elements isn't connected by an invisible paste, they can penetrate and influence each other." Frederick, in the audience, was somewhat distracted. Monaltz's discovery was extremely important, providing a theoretical basis for highly efficient electrolysis using magical energy, significantly reducing energy consumption. Among other things, electrolytic aluminum production was probably on the agenda. Aluminum is extremely precious these days, and its refining relies entirely on the incredible efforts of magicians. First, the red clay containing aluminum hydroxide is purified as much as possible. Then, at a temperature of approximately 1000 degrees Celsius, the aluminum hydroxide is decomposed into aluminum oxide. This is then heated with carbon powder to over 2200 degrees Celsius, where the aluminum oxide and carbon powder react to form elemental aluminum and carbon monoxide. The primary problem with this method is that it's quite demanding on the magician. Few containers can withstand temperatures exceeding 2000 degrees Celsius these days, requiring manual labor. Furthermore, impurities and other products hinder the reaction, and the aluminum vaporizes when heated, making it extremely inefficient. At the wedding of Crown Prince Rudolph of the Rhine Confederation and Princess Antonia of Gaul this year, Louis the Younger presented the newlyweds with a pair of aluminum cups on his father's behalf. They didn't need to be inlaid with gemstones. Frederick pulled a notebook from his pocket and wrote electrolytic aluminum on a new page. Now, no one on this planet, save him and Psyche, could recognize what it was. After Monaltz left, Baron Franz, the most senior of the Wesson family's vassals, took the stage to present the Biology Award. The winner was a middle-aged veterinarian from Caledonia, a region in the northern part of the Kingdom of Anglen, named Zero. Upon receiving his award, he excitedly declared, "I'm grateful to Duke Wesson for his generosity, to Master Psyche for her guidance, to Baron Monifloro for his help, and to Sissy for her encouragement and companionship. They've given me, an outcast, a place to stay and helped me perfect the art of artificial insemination. Once again, I'm grateful to Duke Wesson for his trust in me, making the exceptional appointment of me as Director of the Animal Husbandry and Breeding Division of the Animal Husbandry and Veterinary Bureau of the Ministry of Agriculture." Zero thanked everyone on stage, even the fat lynx raised by Monifloro. Now a beloved pet of Wesson University. Frederick smiled and nodded. He had only just learned about Zero and his work when he signed the list of winners. His experiments over the past few years had been driven by Psyche. Artificial insemination of livestock offers numerous benefits, including significantly increasing the efficiency of breeding high-quality stock, accelerating breed improvement, reducing husbandry and management costs, and preventing the spread of disease. The difficulty with artificial insemination in Zero's research lies in dilution and storage conditions. Currently, they use 5% sugar water, which is diluted approximately 20 times. Priests of the Church of Light perform a healing spell every 8 hours, allowing it to be stored at a low temperature for over 5 days, achieving an 80% pregnancy rate. Living conditions in the canton of Wesson are steadily improving, with demand for meat growing rapidly, and the military also in great demand for draft horses. Breeding high-quality livestock has always been a priority for agricultural work. Frederick was thinking, it's time to tighten your belt and acquire high-quality livestock breeds to establish a dedicated breeding farm. The next medicine prize was awarded to a doctor from the Dark North who extracted the active ingredient from the sleeping mushroom to create a general anesthetic and calculated the relationship between dosage, duration of effect, and weight. The physics prize was won by a scholar from Minxing City in the Duchy of Bavaria for his achievements in optics. Chapter 382. We also organize a science society. After this year's Golden Durian Awards ceremony, many people had second thoughts. Inside a carriage pulled by 6 fiery red unicorns, Fata leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, thinking. Suddenly, he asked Hakan, who sat across from him, "Do you think you can stand on the podium?" Hakan's admission to the elite handful of superhuman powers demonstrated his immense proficiency in magic. Unlike Frederick, who had defeated him, he could only rely on the benefits of a time traveler to win the mathematics award. Psyche, seeing how he had replicated the light god jumping over the wall, had to accept the award with a pinch of salt. "Yes," Hakan said excitedly. "The core theories passed down from my master are worthy of this award." He had recently studied the winners of previous awards and realized that the magic award wasn't yet at the forefront of the field, with some keeping the latest discoveries hidden. For example, Frederick's strange magical elements hadn't been revealed at all. Fata nodded slightly, opened his eyes, looked directly at Hakan, and said seriously, "If you apply, I fully support you." Nowadays, magician inheritance emphasizes lineage and secrecy. Hakan's school's core doctrines, like those of other factions, are kept secret. Even the emperor couldn't force him to submit his proposal if he didn't want to. Hakan understood this, but this time, Fata's eye designation indicated the support of the state. After a moment's reflection, he said, "One branch of our doctrine is ahead of others, but research has reached a dead end. Perhaps we could benefit from outside help. Attitude is paramount when serving a superior. Failure to perform is a matter of ability, while procrastination is a matter of attitude." Haakon's biggest task now is to cling to the Emperor's support and rebuild his power, shattered by his defeat at the hands of Frederick. Since his superior has this intention, he should go along with it. Fade, pleased with his attitude, said, "After you win the prize, I will order you to establish the Imperial Scientific Society, modeled after the Wesson Scientific Society." Haakon's face flushed with excitement. Managing such a society might seem like a lack of political power or economic benefits, but the implications are complex. For all intents and purposes, simply establishing an award modeled after the Golden Durian Award, with royal endorsement, would spark fierce competition, and the referee could become the uncrowned king. Fada closed his eyes again. The country's academic cliques and warlords are deeply intertwined, some practically two sides of the same coin. Giving those aging scholars something to do, freeing them from politics and competing with their peers, would benefit the country's long-term stability. For now, Haakon can only cling to his own leg, so he's being given a hand. Once his influence grows, he can simply replace him with a new agent. Meanwhile, little Louis was pondering the same question. "It's a difficult matter," he sighed. "I saw quite a few people sending their most talented disciples to represent them tonight." His secretary, Armand, was riding in the same carriage with him. He whispered, "Your Highness, trust in the loyalty of these gentlemen. Like other nations, the Kingdom of Gaul possesses a powerful community of magicians who occupy a significant position within the nation's political system, forming the backbone of the system of violence. They also hold significant influence within the administrative system through mentorship and marriage." Indeed, quite a few Gallic magic masters had sent their most talented disciples to attend the ceremony tonight. For young Louis to doubt their loyalty would be tantamount to undermining the very foundations of the nation. Young Louis replied, "I never doubted their loyalty. I meant their wisdom as serving the Duke of Wesson." There was one point in the Duke of Wesson's speech today that really struck me. He mentioned several times the importance of translating knowledge from paper into reality. I believe this is why so many factories have emerged in the canton of Wesson. We're here to learn. You must take this seriously. Collect more information and submit it to me when you return." Armand promised to do so tomorrow. "One more thing," young Louis said. "I heard that the Duke of Wesson is recruiting second-born sons and daughters from noble families within the Rhine Confederation who don't have heir rights to the title to serve in the court and the army. We need to focus on gathering information on this as well." As the Crown Prince's advisor, Armand needed to carefully grasp his leader's intentions to avoid any missteps, so he confirmed, "Your Highness, do you wish to learn from them, or do you have other plans?" Frederick's recruitment of noble sons could be interpreted in many ways: to provide for their livelihoods or to secretly liaise with nobles from all over the country to prepare for rebellion. The latter offered many possibilities. "Learn from them," young Louis nodded. "Don't you think this is a good idea? It would strengthen the royal family's ties with the local nobility and expand the military. Ideally, we could capture all the nobles from their territories and bring them to the capital, which would facilitate the centralization of royal power." The power struggle between the royal family and its vassal states had lasted for countless years. Recently, the militia organization and strong mobilization capabilities of the Wesson state had astounded young Louis, solidifying his determination to centralize power. But the local nobles wouldn't surrender their power for nothing. Centralization wouldn't come from exchanging favors. Only after commanding an overwhelmingly powerful army could one summon everyone to sit down and negotiate, focusing on winning over the people through virtue. The first step in building a stronger army was to raise funds. Without them, even peasants armed with pitchforks couldn't be recruited. Outsiders are the most formidable aspect of the Wessenian canton as its money-making prowess. It was once speculated that the canton's annual military expenditure reached 200,000 florins, administrative staff salaries exceeded 100,000 florins, and combined with investments in education and infrastructure, it required an annual revenue of at least 600,000 florins. When Louis the Younger first heard this figure, he felt a pang of nausea. This was 4 times the annual income of the Gallic royal family. It was widely believed that the Wessenian canton's annual revenue of 600,000 florins was an outrageous figure, intended to bolster bond sales. Some privately claimed that their uncle worked for a strategic intimidation agency whose job was to fabricate exaggerated figures. Regardless, the actual annual revenue of the canton of Wesson must have been over 100,000 florins, comparable to the Gallic royal family. Otherwise, they couldn't afford to support their highly skilled army. Young Louis, eager to emulate Wesson's approach to factory profit, began planning To build a factory, we need a smelter first. We have iron ore, and we can import coal from Angola. Next, a textile mill. We have flax and wool, and we can weave our own cloth, but we don't have the money, Armand said, pouring cold water on the Dauphin. Young Louis sighed helplessly. It would have been fine before, but the recent tulip bust had cost everyone a fortune, and the landlords had no food left. As the Dauphin's assistant, Armand had the responsibility to identify and address any shortcomings. Then came another cold water, the public debt of the Low Countries. Young Louis was on the verge of tears. The Gallic nobles and local officials who managed the Low Countries had colluded to invest public funds in tulips. They'd made a killing in previous years, so they'd ignored it. But this year, it was ruined, leaving them with a hole worth over 100,000 florins that they couldn't fill. The Kingdom of Gaul is pursuing a policy of sucking blood from the lowlands. There's no reason to offer a blood transfusion. If this year's debts can't be repaid, no one will buy new bonds without credibility. And with the prosperous city of Amstel burning down, there's no hope of borrowing new debt to repay old ones. This is a difficult situation, little Louis sighed helplessly. Now that the country is about to advance south, if we delay, the Kingdom of Sardinia might discover our plan. Do you have any way to raise such a large sum of money quickly? Chapter 383 Everyone makes money. After the opening of the Carolina Canal, the nearby Lake St. Henri, which regulates water flow, became a popular destination for the wealthy and the leisurely due to its clear waters, the chirping birdsong of surrounding mountains and forests, and the abundance of fish. The day after the Golden Durian Awards ceremony, Frederick visited a clearing by the lake to survey the terrain for his peach blossom stone garden. The garden was modeled after Frederick's memories of the Grand View Garden, with pavilions, towers, furniture, and bowls all personally designed, except that the Lonque Temple was replaced with a church. Several teams of surveyors were taking elevations, while Frederick fished by the water with little Louis. Little Louis needed help, and Frederick was perhaps the only one in the world who could provide funds to alleviate the financial pressures of the Kingdom of Gaul. He had been praising them since breakfast. Frederick knew what was going on, so they began to flatter each other. The Wesson State Secretary, standing behind them, gave them goosebumps. If Frederick hadn't been involved in scandals with women throughout his life, future generations would have suspected something was going on between them simply by reading the transcript of that day's conversation. As the atmosphere cooled, young Louis said to Frederick with a hint of melancholy, "Our country has been in some trouble lately, and it's all because of that money." Frederick, upon hearing this, immediately replied with awe, "I haven't forgotten the helping hand you extended to me in my time of need 10 years ago. If it weren't for the money Armand sent me, I wouldn't know where I'd be now. Your difficulties are my difficulties. Anything that can be solved with money is no problem. Just tell me how much you want to borrow." Today's society is steeped in favors, especially among the upper nobility. Stories of loyalty and righteousness are recounted, while villains in plays and novels are often heartless. 10 years ago, perhaps out of sympathy for a child or perhaps out of dissatisfaction with William, the nobles of the Kingdom of Gaul each contributed a small amount of money in support. For Frederick, this support was a tremendous help both financially and politically, and especially in terms of public opinion. It put immense pressure on the royal family of the Confederation of the Rhine. For years, Frederick had sent gifts, messages, and letters to Gallic nobles who had helped him in the past, often at festivals and holidays, and had also facilitated their business dealings, laying the foundation for this trade mission. Not to mention Armand, who had made the trip himself. His sister, Françoise, was now the general agent for Wesson paper in the Kingdom of Gaul. The wealth in her safe made her public appearances a scene for young men eager to marry wealthy women. These were only personal favors. On a national level, Frederick had yet to repay the favor. It couldn't be helped. Relations between the two countries had been strained before the marriage between the Crown Prince of the Confederation of the Rhine and the Princess of Gallicum, not to mention the fact that he had helped the Kingdom of Luxembourg defeat the Kingdom of Gaul years earlier. Now that relations were improving, the opportunity presented itself. Young Louis had expected to have to persuade Frederick to lend him the money, but he instantly agreed. However, everyone now knew that the Duke of Wesson had just survived a war and had to pay a large fire insurance claim to the city of Amstel. He had issued 2 bonds totaling 350,000 florins, and presumably his family had little food left. Young Louis had been prepared for this. They had discussed it seriously last night. They didn't expect Frederick to help fill the hole of over 100,000 florins, So they had no choice but to issue royal bonds. These days, royals and nobles are careful about issuing bonds. The amount is measured by average annual income. Bonds around this amount are healthy and can be repaid as long as there are no disasters. Bonds exceeding annual income but within double the amount are often high interest rates, and investment decisions need to be carefully considered based on the political situation and the war situation. The Kingdom of Gaul currently faces a challenge in issuing royal bonds to fill the gap. Their international reputation has been damaged following their utter defeat at the Kingdom of Luxembourg a few years ago, and bonds equivalent to a single year's income are unlikely to be purchased due to the excessive risk. Louis the Younger and his companions planned to approach the Duke of Wessex, a near-universal figure in the economic world. His prediction of a tulip price collapse had indeed come true. If they could lead the way by buying 20 or 30,000 Gallic royal bonds, others would surely flock to follow suit. No one could be sure of the exact amount of gold coins Frederick could offer. Louis the Younger held out his hand, spread his 5 fingers, and shook them. He was a little worried, wondering if he meant 50,000 florins, and if the Duke of Wessex thought it meant 5,000, how would he proceed? But he quickly figured it out. The Duke of Wessex was involved in big business, and he wouldn't bat an eye at a few thousand florins. Seeing the awkward expression on Frederick's face as he spread his 5 fingers, he frowned and set a worm on his recently devoured hook. The hook and bait dropped into the water, and the fish floated on the surface, bobbing with the waves. "I'm sorry," Frederick replied, sending a chill down Louis' spine. "You know, I've been spending too much lately," little Louis sighed inwardly. This was to be expected. In any other country, a debt of 350,000 florins would be crippling, and some even lacked the credit to borrow that much. He had one last trick up his sleeve, a showdown with Frederick, not a real purchase, just to drum up publicity for his own bond issuance. Frederick continued, "I simply can't come up with 500,000 florins in cash right now." Little Louis felt his heart skip a beat, and he mewed, as if he'd misunderstood the scale of the Duke of Wessex's business ventures. Frederick scratched his head, his expression akin to a fierce ideological struggle that embarrassed Louis. Just as little Louis was about to say that it wasn't really that much, Frederick gritted his teeth, made up his mind, turned around, and said sincerely, "Don't worry, Your Highness, I'll definitely help you with this. Cash is really out of your hands. How about this? I'll give you 600,000 florins in Wesson vouchers. These vouchers are worth nothing elsewhere, but here you can purchase directly from factories and government departments." Little Louis's hands trembled several times. Frederick had said give him 600,000 florins, not borrow, even if he dared to give such a large sum. He wouldn't dare accept it. He was sure that if he really accepted the money, people would doubt whether the old Count Wesson had met his mother on his fishing trip to Gaul. "Not 600,000 crowns?" little Louis asked cautiously. Here, 1 gold florin was exchanged for 20 silver cruises, and 600,000 cruises equaled 30,000 florins, which made sense. Frederick answered confidently, 600,000 florins. Little Louis, after calming himself, said, "That's too much? I'd better borrow it from you." Frederick felt a pang of regret. If he accepted the money, he could legitimately claim a large plot of land in the lowlands. "Very well," Frederick nodded. "Then I won't charge you interest. How about this? We don't have to pay you back in gold. We can just barter. You know we're short of wheat, wool, flax, iron ore, salt, magic crystals, and the like." Little Louis calculated. The vouchers Frederick had given him could be sold to merchants outside of Wesson at a 10% premium. This was the dumbest idea. He could use them to purchase goods at the expo if he sold them back. Anyone would be guillotined if the return was less than 1 million florins. Of course, he wouldn't be doing this business himself. He could lend it to other nobles and collect a hefty interest. That was 4 years' worth of royal revenue. Even 10% interest was a considerable sum. Repayment in kind was much easier. 600,000 florins equaled 2.1 tons of gold, a significant amount difficult to find. However, exchanging it for other commodities was easier. The Kingdom of Gaul itself exported a variety of agricultural products and had abundant iron ore. If the royal family collected taxes in kind and used them to repay the debt, the cost would only be around 500,000 florins. Louis the Younger had suddenly discovered a way to make money. The final amount collected from the loan of bills minus the cost of the debt repayment would equal the royal family's annual income. He felt he had made a profit, and Frederick felt he hadn't lost out either. He happily pulled a fish, plump as a balloon, from his hook. The bills were low-interest bonds personally loaned by Frederick from the Wessenland Bank. Gallic nobles used the bills to purchase goods from factories. The factories could deposit the bills as cash or use them to pay taxes, and the entire amount would be returned to the bank as a debt in Frederick's name. The supplies arriving from the Kingdom of Gaul to repay its debt were being sold at a 10% discount on the normal wholesale price. These goods were destined for Frederick, who would repay the debt with interest after the goods were sold. Frederick profited greatly from the higher profits from the sales, while the bank collected the interest. Louis the Younger profited handsomely from selling the vouchers and collecting taxes in kind to repay the debt. This gave the Gallic nobility more money to purchase goods for sale, and numerous factories in the canton of Wesseland received large orders. Everyone seemed happy. Frederick placed the balloon fish in the fish basket and, while baiting it, said to Louis the Younger, "I heard your country is expanding into the inland sea and needs funds. If this model works, I think we could continue it." Louis the Younger calmed down. This was 600,000 florins. It was just an emergency loan, but lending him so much every year, or even every 2 years, must have some ulterior motive. He asked, "How can I help you?" Frederick scratched his head a little embarrassedly and said, "I want a title from your country." Little Louis' head was full of question marks. It was not surprising that nobles had titles in foreign countries, but they were all obtained through marriage. It was extremely rare to see such blatant titles. Frederick added in a low voice, "From the lowlands, I'll save it for later." Little Louis was stunned, and then he understood that Frederick had a lover who was from the lowlands. Little Louis hesitated. This was a bit inconsistent with domestic policies, but Frederick had just given him a way to make money, and no noble in the country could make even 1/10 of it. He finally made a decision. "No problem." Chapter 384 Visiting the Park. "Father, I want that." Okay, I'll buy it for you right now." In the botanical garden south of Wessenberg, a boy, about 10 years old, tugged at his father's blacksmith's coat to buy candied fruit skewers. The vendor, who looked like the one selling candied haws in Frederick's hometown, lowered the pole laden with candied fruit skewers to let the child choose. Not far away, Prince Moritz turned to his son, whom he hadn't seen in over a year, and asked, "Would you like some?" Eugene shook his head dejectedly. "That's for children." Prince Moritz, ignoring the attention, hurried over and asked, "Which one is the best?" The vendor replied, "Different people have different tastes, so I can't say for sure." Prince Moritz held out a Kruse coin and said, "2 skewers each, keep the change." The vendors loved such customers, their smiles brighter than the sun. Prince Moritz took his own portion in his left hand and pressed the other into Eugene's hands with his right. Father and son ate as they wandered aimlessly through the botanical gardens. This botanical garden is the largest public park in the world. Roughly square, 1 kilometer on a side, it features plant species from various regions, a low mountain stream, pavilions and corridors, a spacious lawn, a glass greenhouse, and a children's playground. Because of the large lake in the center, which draws water from the river, the locals call it South Lake Park. Eugene, dissatisfied with military traditions, was gossiped about his reforms and blamed for his defeat. The accusers, who had been cleared of their grievances, went unpunished. He then pursued the cause all the way to the city of Venin in the Osmogorian Empire to seek refuge with Frederick. Prince Moritz was furious at his son's unfair treatment, but he was a member of one faction within the kingdom, while the enemy was from another. King Louis the Elder, seeking to maintain balance, ultimately turned a blind eye to his son's departure. This time, he had come with a trade delegation, hoping to take the opportunity to observe his son's thoughts more closely. Prince Moritz ate some preserves and asked his son, "Is this enough money now?" Eugene replied, "I get about 60 livres a year at the military academy. If I rank first in the exam next year, I'll be promoted to second lieutenant and go out to lead troops, earning over 230 livres a year." The livre he was referring to was a 3-gram gold coin from the Kingdom of Gaul, slightly smaller than the 3.5-gram florin of the Confederation of the Rhine, so those unfamiliar with it might mistake it for gold. Prince Moritz curled his lips and said, "How can this be enough?" Eugene was the 5th of 8 children in his family, and each child received an annual pension of over 1,000 livres from the family to cover daily expenses. Eugene continued, "My mother gave me 8,000 livres when I left home. With the help of my friend Metzger, I invested 7,500 livres in several factories. Soon, I'll be receiving dividends of around 1,500 livres a year." Prince Moritz nodded. A 20% annual return was a respectable sum, and it would pay off in 5 years. His body suddenly stiffened, his face twitching. He turned to his son and asked in a trembling voice, "Where did your mother get so much money?" Eugene smiled faintly and replied, "She found it under the fountain in the garden." Prince Moritz looked up at the sky, reminiscing about the lost private money. After calming down, he changed the subject. "What are your thoughts on marriage?" Eugene was in his 20s. If it weren't for the Lisenberg debacle and his subsequent escape a few years ago, he would have been married by now. He replied, "I don't have time to think about that right now. There's too much to do in the army. Let's talk about it in 2 years." Prince Moritz nodded and said, "That's fine. A man's career is most important. Since you've chosen Wesson, serve him wholeheartedly, don't worry about things at home. Although I lost some money on tulips recently, His Royal Highness Louis secured a loan yesterday. This time, we'll make it back quickly with a batch of goods and the opening of trade routes. Are you thirsty?" The two of them walked to a tea stall. Prince Moritz, ignoring his son's lack of response, went over, took out his money and points card, and bought 2 cups of lemon tea. He sipped through straws as he walked. Prince Moritz continued, "Choose a wife of your choice. Beauty doesn't matter. You'll be away from home for years, fighting away from home. It's best to find someone who can manage the household well. There aren't any big families here in Wesson. I know Baron Eltel, the foreign minister of the Duchy of Mainz. Ask him to inquire for you." Eugene drank his lemon tea quietly, pretending not to hear his father's next words. Prince Moritz asked him again, "Have you bought a house here?" Eugene replied, "If I'm promoted to second lieutenant next year, I'll be able to rent land. I plan to rent a manor with a 499-year lease and build a house there." Prince Moritz nodded. Seeing an ice cream cone for sale on the roadside, the father and son quickly grabbed a drink and an ice cream cone. After finishing his vanilla ice cream, Prince Moritz remembered something. "Oh, by the way, Wesson will be visiting us next year as a private tourist. His Majesty will be arranging a knights tournament in Paris, and the champion will receive a piece of land in the lowlands. If he asks you to go, don't refuse. It's a rare opportunity to build a good relationship with him." Eugene thought for a moment and said, "Did you read this morning's newspaper? The army will undergo a series of reforms after the expansion next year. It's unwise to leave now." Prince Moritz simply said, "You can do whatever you want," and then went to the roadside to buy 2 unicorn sugar paintings made from malt sugar. "You're familiar with this place?" he asked his son, chewing on a candy painting. "What kind of business could we start at home?" Eugene ate the unicorn's tail, which was easy to lose, and then said, "The newspaper says the easiest things to make money from are food, clothing, housing, and transportation. Everyone needs them, so they were easy to sell. I think a lot of people will buy ordinary clothes. As for food, I can contact Metzger to buy some Fujiang flour. It helps with weight and strength, and tableware is also good. Oh, right? We can buy bicycles and tricycles to take back. He doesn't need horses or mules, people can use 2 legs, and equipping soldiers is much faster than walking. You can ask the principal if they can sell you some uniforms to Wesson Army standards. The uniforms here are much sturdier than the ones at home, and they last longer, so it's very cost-effective." Prince Moritz nodded and wanted to ask if he could buy military weapons, but he gave up the idea before he could say it. Uniforms are one thing, weapons are another. And it can't affect his son's future. Father and son continued to talk about what to buy, and when they reached the lake, they had just finished eating grilled fish balls on skewers. Prince Moritz saw something being sold in front of a small house by the lake, in packages that looked like food, so he went over without saying a word. He quickly bought a package of something and came back with granules the size of beans. "Pooh, pooh, pooh, how can this be so disgusting? It tastes a bit like golden beans, and even more like hay, and it also smells like fish." Eugene slapped his forehead. Before he could stop him, his father had stuffed a fish feet into his mouth. "It's for feeding the fish," Eugene explained to his father with a smile. "There are many colorful fish in the lake, and many parents and children on the shore are throwing feet into the water, attracting a large group of fish to scramble for it. The people here really know how to have fun." Prince Moritz looked very depressed. "I'll give you some pocket money later, and don't tell anyone about this." As soon as he finished speaking, little Louis' voice came from behind him. "What the hell is this? It's so disgusting." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 385 Expanding Cooperation. August 15th. The morning in Wessenland was already slightly chilly, the city shrouded in a light mist. The city woke unusually early that day, and the aroma of breakfast smoke quickly dispelled the mist, condensing in the air and choking the people in the hilltop castle. Before 7 o'clock, the streets suddenly became crowded with pedestrians and cars, all heading towards the south gate, bound for Nanhu Park to attend the World Expo beside the park's lake, a fan-shaped lawn with a radius of 100 meters. Traditionally a spot for tourists to bask in the sun, had been erected a few days ago near where Prince Moritz and His Royal Highness the younger Louis had eaten fish feed, creating a large shed for the World Expo. A platform had been erected outside the main entrance, with a large area of chairs placed in front. A large number of Wesson officers and soldiers were deployed to maintain order around the venue. Hazenpras waved to Metzger as he entered with his wife. The Gallic trade group collectively surrounded Eugene for 5 minutes. Over there, Jurgen, riding a unicorn, led a detachment of cavalry on patrol, flanked by nurses from the medical school. Order within the venue is relatively good. Translators, wearing uniform white suits with insignias corresponding to different languages, led guests to their seats with seating charts. Walkiuli, a girl from the dark north, didn't wear the green robes of the Aurora warriors today, but the traditional dress of her homeland. She wore a pure white long-sleeved shirt, imported from Wesson State, over a deep blue sleeveless dress. The hem of her dress was embroidered with the northerner's favorite floral pattern, and the front was also covered in flowers. Her headscarf was embroidered with 7 wolf heads and 3 bear heads. Outsiders couldn't understand it, but her fellow villagers knew it was a tribute to her military achievements. Today she had braided her long hair into pigtails, one on each side, and let them hang in front of her. In her hand, she held an exquisite handbag given by Frederick, and on her left hand, she wore a bracelet made of ordinary oak leaves, which was left by her mother. The translator brought Walkiuli to her seat. Guests and merchants from the Dark Land were all sitting here. King Kosdorf of the Kingdom of Severia arrived first. When Kosdorf greeted Walkiuli, he was stunned for a moment when he saw her face clearly. Then, when he saw the leaf bracelet on her left hand, his whole body froze. Fade, who was not far away, saw his reaction and raised the corner of his mouth slightly. This time, he was going to have fun and motioned Hakan to eavesdrop. As a representative of the Church of Nature, Walkiuli was qualified to sit on an equal footing with Kosdorf. After the two sat down in their seats, they only exchanged a few polite words, which disappointed Fade. At 9 o'clock, the guests arrived and Frederick began to speak on the stage. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you at the beautiful Nanhu Botanical Garden for the first World Expo. On behalf of the Wesson government, I would like to extend my warm congratulations on the convening of this expo and my sincere welcome to all our friends from around the world. We will uphold win-win cooperation, promote connectivity, strengthen economic and trade cooperation, and strive to create an environment conducive to development, prosperity, peace, and tranquility, building a peaceful, tranquil, prosperous, beautiful, and friendly homeland. To further promote trade among all parties, the Wesson government and the Wesson Bank will jointly issue friendship bonds totaling 10 million florins. The audience had no interest in Frederick's rhetoric, they were eager for information on the friendship bonds. Louis the Younger and Frederick reached a 600,000 florin barter agreement and announced it to the Gallic nobles that same evening. The entire city of Wessenland knew about it the next day, and Frederick was met with a crowd. The saying goes, it's not the lack of money that's worrying, but the inequality of it. No one cared whether Frederick was giving away such a large sum out of loyalty, they wanted whatever the Gauls had. The first to appear was the Grand Duke of Mainz, who was at the cathedral construction site. Without even removing his hard hat, he cornered Frederick in his study. Soon after, the Grand Duke of Bavaria and other nobles of the Rhine Confederation arrived, jointly demanding a share of 1 million. Next came Fade. Knowing his relationship with Frederick wasn't particularly close, he used his 2 million florins in his Wesson bank deposit as collateral to demand 4 million in bills, demonstrating the arrogance of the Ghazi Empire. The representative from the Kingdom of Kush arrived late, repeatedly hinting that Susan was old enough to marry back home. Frederick gave him 800,000 bills and sent him away. The head of the Osmogorian merchant group was the Minister of Finance. With the Emperor's impending death, He took his final shift organizing nobles and merchants to trade. He didn't come in person, but instead sent his twin granddaughters, who had met Frederick the previous year in Wien. After a night of intense negotiations, they secured 2 million bills. Next came the representative of the Kingdom of Luxembourg. He reminisced about their joint defeat of the Kingdom of Gaul and invited Frederick to visit his country next year. He left with 400,000 invoices. The visitors from the Kingdom of Sardinia were Princess Lola and her husband, future in-laws of the master's wife, and they were obliged to show respect, taking the 400,000 invoices. Representatives from the Helvetic Confederation, the Kingdom of Anglia, the Kingdom of Denmark, the Sami Confederation, the Kingdom of Severia, the Kingdom of Suomi, the Kingdom of Tarragona, the Kingdom of Pest, and the Green Island, among others, were not to miss such an opportunity and gave Frederick a good geography lesson. Frederick was surprised by the enthusiasm, but he remained calm. He strictly stipulated that foreign bonds could only be sold to the highest rulers of the country to prevent absconding. He also imposed some restrictions on trade. Factories could not produce all goods at once, and orders from a single region would take months or even a year to fulfill. Deliveries would only begin the next quarter after at least 80% of the invoices had been paid off in a quarter. This time frame could be gradually extended, depending on the country's creditworthiness. Business was business, and the merchants understood Frederick's approach and had no objections. Now everyone wanted to know whether this policy was a one-off or a lasting one. Frederick would not miss out on such an opportunity. The nobles and merchants were trying to take advantage of him, and he was targeting their raw materials and markets. So, Frederick announced today that this cooperative model would be sustainable, with a specific amount fluctuating depending on the transaction situation, and the amount could be increased in places with good credit. The merchants were immediately excited. Capital was the most important thing in business, and now they could increase it with nothing, which meant their wealth would increase even faster. No one paid any attention to Frederick's speeches about friendship, development, and peace. They just hoped it would end quickly so they could secure the factory project before anyone else. Chapter 386 Sell, Sell, Sell. Some people are born to be the star. Even if it's not their own show, they'll find a way to grab the audience's attention. Fatty was one of those people. After Frederick's speech, the expo officially opened, and he held a signing ceremony on stage. He had arrived early, and had already concluded many business deals while chatting and joking with the merchants. Today, he just wanted to show off his wealth and buy more than everyone else. The first person to come on stage to sign a contract with Fatty was Hoffman. He had recently opened the Clover Armor Factory, a separate company from the existing Clover Hinge Factory, but with the same team. Today, he signed a contract for 3,000 sets of scale armor. Next came a steel pipe factory. Fatty ordered 10,000 pipes with an inner diameter of 15 millimeters and a length of 1.3 meters, and 500 pipes with an inner diameter of 100 millimeters and a length of 1.5 meters, all with rifling. Frederick ignored him. Fatty said he would have a deep discussion with him about political issues after the expo, and that they would discuss any further matters later. Today's World Expo was divided into 16 exhibition areas, encompassing vehicles and boats and accessories, large machinery, hardware tools, building materials, raw materials, consumer goods, handicrafts and gifts, jewelry, furniture, lighting, home accessories, clothing, shoes and hats, office and school supplies, pharmaceuticals, food, and military supplies, with over 600 booths. Frederick immediately approached the northern guests, led by Walke Uli and Kosdorf, and led them to the large machinery exhibition area by the lake. Upon arrival, Kosdorf pointed to a machine and asked Frederick, "What's that big iron barrel for?" He had received earlier information that Frederick planned to import large quantities of ore, including iron ore, from the north. Ore contains a lot of impurities, so long-distance transportation naturally requires the highest possible purity. Those strange machines were likely used for ore sorting. Frederick pointed to several machines over there and said, "This is a set of iron ore beneficiation machines. The hammers here can smash the washed ore into particles smaller than a finger, and then send them to the ball mill." The large iron barrel that Kosdorf pointed to just now was a ball mill. With the current industrial strength of the state of Wesson, the most mature beneficiation ball mill has a diameter of 0.6 meters and a length of 1.2 meters. It has indirect feeding and discharging, and can process 0.5 to 0.05 tons of ore per hour depending on the ore situation. After listening to the working principle of the ball mill, Kosdorf held up several steel grinding balls of different sizes and marveled at it. He couldn't help but sigh. When this machine turns, the ore and the balls fall together, which is equivalent to countless hammers hammering the ore. It is faster than hammering it slowly one by one, and the hammering is extremely fine. Whose brain is so smart to come up with this good idea? The northern businessmen behind him nodded in agreement. Frederick simply smiled, offering no further explanation. His explanation for inventing the ball mill was that he'd discovered it as a child while smashing smaller stones with a large one, a claim embellished and found its way into elementary school Chinese textbooks. He pointed to another piece of equipment nearby and said, after preliminary screening, the ore powder is added with water and then poured into this spiral chute from above. The spiral chute here was just a sample. It was a story-high iron frame, with spiral troughs made of steel-framed hard plastic mounted on it, like a spiral slide. The ore powder is mixed with water to form a slurry, which is then poured into the trough from above. As the ore slurry flows through the spiral trough, centrifugal force forces the denser components to the outside. By the time the ore slurry reaches the bottom, the particles are denser on the outside and smaller in the inside. By installing guide plates to divert the flow, different compositions can be obtained. I see. That's amazing, Kosdorf nodded repeatedly, seemingly understanding. Following the spiral chute is a shaker, which further refines the roughly sorted ore. While a demonstration wasn't possible on site, samples of the ore after various processing steps were prepared nearby, along with a complete set of instruments for determining ore quality using slime acid extracted from the acid slime that could dissolve the female knight's armor. This set was more than sufficient for the era. Frederick told Kosdorf, the higher the quality of the ore, the more valuable it is. A shipload of refined ore sand will earn you twice as much as the ore itself. Kosdorf, as king and the largest landowner in the kingdom of Sverige, possessed numerous mines. After accepting the information, Kosdorf said, "That's great. I'll order 30 sets." He planned to monopolize the ore refining industry domestically and in the eastern North Sea to raise funds for the impending war. Duke Wesson, I want 50 sets. A wealthy man suddenly emerged from the crowd. He wore a narrow, fitted navy blue silk robe with gold embroidery at the collar and cuffs. The most striking feature was the outstretched wings embroidered on his chest, a distinctive emblem of the Piast Winged Hussars uniforms. Your Excellency, Duke, we meet again. He bowed deeply to Frederick, appearing extremely respectful. Your Highness Casimir. Frederick had already learned from intelligence that Casimir, the Piast crown prince whom he had defeated on the Elbe River, was also present, though he kept a low profile and conducted negotiations through agents. As the saying goes, when you hold an exposition, you entertain 16 parties, all who come are guests, and everyone smiles. Frederick said with a smile, very well, buy more, the better. Casimir breathed a sigh of relief, having worried that Frederick would withhold sales due to the war. The Piast kingdom had plains and mines, and besides mining equipment, they also needed to import large quantities of fertilizer, agricultural tools, and high-quality seeds. Casimir had been implementing reforms in the country after sidelining his father, which had infringed on the interests of many. Advanced agricultural production tools were needed to win over small landowners, and a ban on their sale would be very troublesome. Frederick was happy to see others purchase more mineral processing equipment. Importing concentrate himself would save a lot of trouble and perhaps even boost the export of snakeskin bags. Ahem. Frederick suddenly coughed twice, and the tense atmosphere between Kosdorf and Casimir disappeared instantly. The kingdom of Sverige and the kingdom of Piast face each other from north to south across the North Sea. In recent years, Kosdorf has sent troops pretending to be pirates to the south for reconnaissance and looting, and has frequently invaded the coast of the kingdom of Piast, even going upstream. Casimir was not to be outdone, and the kingdom of Piast also sent its own pirates to the north for revenge. Frederick ignored them and left after saying something. He still had to go and sell inland ships to Little Louis. Walkilia was hesitating whether to follow, and Casimir whispered to her in a parental tone, "Follow, why are you standing there?" Frederick was at the lake not far away, where several paddle steamers of different sizes were parked, and people were being taken on board for a visit in batches. The shipyard has now launched two basic ship models, with a carrying capacity of 50 and 100 tons respectively. Both are 5.5 meters wide, 30 to 40 meters long, and have a draft of about 1 meter. The steam engine and paddle wheel are located at the stern, and both are available in passenger and freight versions. The passenger model is enclosed, modeled after a train carriage, with soft and hard seats, as well as soft and hard sleepers, a kitchen, and instant noodles. The wooden hulls of these ships are not expensive. A 100-ton freighter costs about 20 florins, while a 100-horsepower steam engine costs only 70 florins. Young Louis, on the rooftop terrace of the passenger ship, saw Frederick approaching and wondered how to get him to lower the price. 200 florins would be a good price, compared to a modern three-masted galley costing just over 100 florins. The Kingdom of Gaul has many rivers, making water transportation quite developed. The plains are located in the north, and with the upcoming military deployment in the south, purchasing 100 or 200 ships would greatly facilitate the transportation of supplies. No, Frederick shook his head helplessly. 260 florins is already the lowest price. Any lower would mean a loss. What a joke. If the price dropped, how would he even get the money to build a sea transport fleet and navy? Frederick continued, a ship this size normally requires 10 rowers, but now they're doing without them, which means 50 gold florins a year. Ship sizes weren't this fast before, especially when sailing upstream. They can now make 2 trips in the time it used to take 1. Also, when we used rowers, they had to sleep at night, but now the machines don't. With 2 more people taking shifts, it's like making 4 trips for everyone. Look, that'll pay off in 2 or 3 years, and it'll be pure profit. He acted like a delivery guy, completely ignoring the downtime from maintenance and undelivered deliveries. Little Louis was fooled. He and his fellow nobles only understood the macroeconomic data of water transport, not the nitty-gritty operations, treating the river boats like workers on an assembly line. Lower the price, he tried a final struggle. I'll order 200, Frederick gritted his teeth and reluctantly lowered the price to 250 florins, a friendly price he offered, something no one else could match. He wasn't worried about the ship failing to sell, as it was incredibly efficient, and he still possessed the core technology of the steam engine, which no one else had. It wasn't that no one had considered replicating the steam engine, and many attempted reverse engineering, but the export of various machine tools from Wesson was prohibited. The success rate for handmade cylinders and pistons alone was less than 1%. Not to mention the pitfalls the steam engine factory had created. For example, the bolts for the top cover were made of high-strength elemental steel. Bolts of the same size made from ordinary steel couldn't withstand the pressure of the boiler, and the first experiment failed. A few people managed to build a replica, but its power, efficiency, size, and cost were far inferior to the Wesson model. It was fine for personal use in the mill, but it was faster and cheaper for others to buy it directly from Wesson. Moreover, the propeller ships were about to set sail. He could harvest a wave of goods with the paddle steamers first, build up his own fleet, and then harvest again later. Little Louis had no choice but to grit his teeth and accept the situation. There was no other way. When the steam engine, a replica of the Gallic Kingdom's Royal Mage Corps, exploded, its cover flew hundreds of meters away, killing 4 mages and injuring 3. A knight guarding the gate was terrified. With a kind smile, Frederick said goodbye to little Louis as he went to buy a steam engine. Orders for inland steamships were expected to exceed 1,000, and this was just the beginning. He disembarked and decided to wander around. Chapter 387 It's Cheap, Buy It, Part 1. In Wesson Province, profit margins on heavy industrial goods are astronomically high, but light industrial goods are a different story, favoring a low profit margin and quick turnover. In other words, it's dumping. At a stall, Olive asked the owner, "Sir, are the nails really that cheap?" Lately, there's been a surge in foreigners, including merchants from the Ghazi Empire, and translators are in short supply. After opening Ghazi Barbecue, Olive sent a letter to relatives in Wanjing City, telling them he'd settled down there and was doing well. Ozkan, a relative of that relative's, was a merchant dealing with nomadic peoples east of the Inner Sea. Her arrival in Wesson Province was fraught with unfamiliarity and language barriers. Upon arrival, Olive remembered hearing about a distant relative selling barbecue there during her last visit home, so she asked for her help. Initially, Olive was reluctant to translate, as she had her own shop to run, but the offer was excessive. The owner of the nail factory said to Olive seriously, "Tell him that when gold florin buys 200 kilograms of horseshoe nails. Buying at least 30 tons at a time will get you 220 kilograms. Olive translated the price to Ozkan again, who suddenly hugged the owner excitedly and launched into rambling, leaving Olive no time to translate. In those days, traditional nail making was a laborious process. First, Red-hot wrought iron billets were beaten into bars, then cut into lengths before being hammered into nails. Nowadays, elsewhere, a 3.5-gram gold florin can buy about 150 kilograms of wrought iron or 70 kilograms of nails. In many places, these bars and nails are even used as currency. Today, there are over a dozen nail factories in the state of Wesson, producing nails ranging from finger-sized nails for construction and shipbuilding to smaller nails less than 2 centimeters long. There's also this one that specializes in horseshoe nails. Here, the steel mills directly transform wrought iron and mild steel bars delivered from the smelters into wire and steel wire of varying specifications. The nail factory cleans and dusts the purchased wire before feeding it into a nail machine, which cuts out nails at a rate of 5 per second. Finally, they are polished in a roller, along with sawdust and husks. The output and quality surpass those of traditional craftsmanship. The current factory price for ordinary steel in Wesson is approximately 300 kilograms per florin, making nail production very low. Wrought iron horseshoe nails are even cheaper, and even after long-distance transportation, their price can still undercut traditional nails. On the steppes east of the Inner Sea, horseshoes and horseshoe nails are as essential as swords and iron pots, so much so that 2 tribes can clash over a single box of nails. Ozcan, now affiliated with several large tribes and a dozen or so smaller ones, brought several ships of grassland specialties, primarily wool and furs, as well as some medicinal herbs. The most valuable item was a batch of tapestries from the Great Stone Empire further east. The tapestries from the Great Stone Empire were all sold while passing through the Osmoga Empire's capital, Wayne City. The established nobles there were discerning about their value, fetching prices exceeding their weight in gold. He calculated and immediately placed an order for 200 tons of horseshoe nails. He then went to the nearby market to purchase various nails and hammers. Together with the 600 tons of horseshoes he had purchased earlier, this totaled 1,000 tons, just enough for one shipload. After discussing these matters, Olive took the exhibition map and led Ozcan to the clothing, shoes, and hats section. The Wesson state was undergoing a transition from an agricultural to an industrial society, with a corresponding shift in lifestyle. The wealthy new class and the more affluent began to focus on basic necessities. These new demands and market conditions led to the further development of convenient, simple, and elegant clothing. This transformation brought about a clash between the old and the new. Some sought a harmonious coexistence of the new and the old, some incorporated traditional elements into new systems, and others adapted traditional clothing with new elements, resulting in a flourishing of diverse styles. Under Frederick's subtle promotion, a fashion style that promoted individuality and self-expression saw significant development. Hemlines finally rose to within a palm of the knee, though stockings or boots were still required. Thanks to the Wesson Canton's philosophy of knowledge is wealth, fashion designers received commissions or buyouts for their creations. The fair offered an opportunity to showcase their designs, and concepts like fashion shows and mannequins began to emerge. There were now separate venues for men's and women's clothing, each held in a large tent. Olive glanced at the large tent. The display was filled with high-quality clothing. The cheapest piece was enough to buy fried chicken for 6 months, but he didn't have the money to buy any more. While the fashionable clothes here weren't suitable for riding and herding on the grasslands, there was a strong market for undergarments, pullovers, long johns, sweaters, trousers, socks, and other items. Buttons were also in demand. Ozcan first stopped at a pullover booth and gestured for Olive to ask for a cheap cotton piece to inspect its quality. Traditional coarse cloth is not strong due to hand-woven fabrics, and the thread thickness varies, making it somewhat loose. The sewing technique of coarse clothes also varies from person to person. A good tailor has even stitches, while a poor tailor has uneven stitches, and sometimes you can see the other side when you lift it up. Nowadays, ordinary cloth produced in the state of Wesson is all machine-made from the beginning of spinning. Compared with coarse cloth, the knots are denser and stronger. You can tell from the touch that this material is only suitable for knights. Not to mention the stitches on the clothes, which are all sewn by sewing machines, fine, even, and very strong. Ozcan thought that this sample was an exception and that the quality of the spot goods would be much worse. He had been fooled by this kind of thing many times when he first started doing business, so he asked Olive to ask the staff at the booth to bring out a few more pieces. "Why would they lie to you?" Olive said disdainfully of her distant relative. "You know, here in Wesson State, everything from cotton to clothing is machine-made. It's definitely much better than those country folk, Besides, we have quality standards for weaving and clothing here. Selling anything that doesn't meet the standards on the market will result in a fine. Her barbecue restaurant was often frequented by people from the textile factory, and she had heard a lot about factory work. Seeing her earnest words, Ozkan was a bit convinced, but still had the staff bring over several pieces of clothing of varying specifications. The fabric quality was identical, and the stitching looked identical. Even the best tailors couldn't achieve that. He inquired about the price, and it was just as shockingly cheap. This kind of ordinary clothing would cost around 80 copper coins elsewhere, but here the wholesale price was around 30. On the grasslands, 100 copper coins would be no problem. The same was true for other clothing, too. The price was more than half that of other places, and the quality was even better. And the cloth was even better. The blacksmith's cloth was incredibly strong, coated with slime for waterproofing, making it perfect for tents. After a long walk through the area, Ozkan bought 3 boatloads of textiles. Olive then asked him, after buying clothes, should I buy laundry detergent? Confused, Ozkan asked, what is laundry detergent? Olive recited, clothes need to be washed frequently, otherwise they'll get skin diseases and fleas. A few years ago, Professors Geisler and Bauer of the University of Wessenland first invented soap powder, which makes washing clothes much easier. Then they added insecticides and fungicides to it. Experiments showed that villages that washed clothes daily had significantly fewer skin diseases than other villages. She'd memorized all this information from the newspaper. Ozkan pondered and said, sounds like it could be used for washing people. He thought about how the people on the grasslands rarely bathed. The problem was that there were so many mosquitoes and leeches near the water. After bathing, they'd get bitten all over, and they'd have to use charcoal to burn the leeches. As a result, even when the chief offered him a beautiful woman, he was a little scared. He'd really just have to hold his nose and do it. Olive looked at him like a bumpkin and said, everyone has their own soap for bathing. Duke Wesson, for example, likes to use soap with sulfur. Ozkan was about to ask her how she knew what kind of soap Duke Wesson liked to use when Olive continued, they sell things for bathing outdoors here. I think it's in the military supply section. The outdoor bathing supplies she was talking about were portable showers from the Wesson Army. They were shaped like a round water bag with a necromancy magic array for sterilization and heating. There were water pipes and a shower head underneath. When not in use, they folded up and put them in a bag. After the launch, they were well received by the caravan. On the way to the military supply section, the two of them passed by the furniture section. When they passed a stall, Ozkan's eyes widened. They're all fine knives. He was no stranger to the quality of the weapons. No wonder the Wesson Army is so invincible. With weapons this fine, what are you laughing at? Olive smiled. This is the furniture section. You're holding a knife you use at home for cutting vegetables. I have 2 of those in my shop. Ozkan's face twitched, and he stared in disbelief, asking, such fine knives for cutting vegetables? Olive didn't reply, simply pointing to a nearby table where a cutting board and shredded radishes lay. Ozkan inquired about the price, and it was indeed very cheap. He bought half the boatload of knives, forks, and spoons, leaving the other half for the pressure cookers from the stall next door. Is this tableware made of slime? His journey to the military supply section was delayed again. So light. It doesn't look very sturdy, Olive said to him. These bowls are light and won't break if they fall. If you want something sturdy, there are rust-proof steel tableware over there. Half the boatload was full again, and Ozkan braked in time, otherwise he would run out of money for weapons. Chapter 388 It's Cheap, Buy It, Part 2. As he was about to enter the military supplies section, a novelty caught Ozkan's eye. What are these? Olive replied. Washing machines. Several manufacturers now specialize in washing machines. Some produce large steam-powered machines, others focus on research for household washing machines, and still others visit the agricultural implement section and the food section. The former's machines are used to wash Elizabeth potatoes, radishes, and beets, while the latter are used to make butter. A water tower, connected to water and drainage pipes, stood beside the exhibition area, housing several washing machines for demonstration. These magical washing machines essentially used vortex magic to swirl the water. The differences varied depending on whether they were fully manual, semi-automatic, or fully automatic, and whether they had a water-repellent spin function. Washing machines with necromancy sterilization also required a magic-resistant outer shell. Traditional cloth, due to its hand-woven nature, was not strong. The traditional washing method, which involved simply beating the clothes in water until they were clean, was very damaging, so people rarely washed clothes. The washing machines here seemed much more gentle, minimizing damage to clothing. Ozcan looked at it for a moment, then shook his head and said, "It's a good thing, but it's not suitable for the grasslands." Some people laughed and some cried here, and many business owners were almost in tears. These days, except in Wesson State, ordinary people didn't have running water in their homes. They had to go to a well and pump water in. Ozcan thought he could buy two to take home, but there was no market for them on the grasslands. There was a household washing machine that looked suitable. It was the cheapest of the lot, made almost entirely of wood, with only the chain and bearings made of iron. It was powered by pedaling like a bicycle. Frederick had been utterly baffled by it, believing it was nothing more than a modified ball mill. It was just a horizontal wooden barrel with a waterproof door cut into the side, and a few wooden planks nailed inside to channel the water and clothes, creating a drum washing machine. But it was cheap and had a vast rural market. Judging by the business owner's expression, he must have signed many orders. However, its size made it difficult for herders to carry it around. Those who didn't mind moving it had plenty of people to do their laundry, so they didn't eat it. Finally, Ozcan bought a batch of washboards. Seeing that there was laundry detergent for sale, he also bought a lot. However, the washboards went astray on the grassland and became instruments of torture. As for the laundry detergent, it transformed into a miracle cure for wounds and infections. Ozcan finally reached the military supply section and headed straight for the guns. Disappointedly, they only had folding shotguns and revolvers for sale. No standard weapons, let alone fire from the sky. However, these weapons were always expensive, so he couldn't buy them by the ship, so he only bought a few. At the sword shop, Ozcan asked the staff, "Do you have the same sword Duke Wesson used when he single-handedly rescued the prince in the kingdom of Kush?" Olive translated, and the staff shook their heads and replied, "The commander used an officer's standard sword, so it's not for sale, but we have replicas," they said. "They're the same size and shape. And the quality isn't quite as good, but they're still top-notch." Ozcan sighed and said, "Every man on the steppes wants a sword like that these days." The staff member brought the replicas and said, "Although it's a replica, it's made of good steel and a good weapon." Many people in the South buy it. Olive reached out curiously to touch it, then weighed it. Then, turning to Ozcan, she said, "It looks almost the same as the real thing, just a little lighter." Frederick had touched the real thing and carefully cleaned it when she visited Wanjing City. Ozcan said, "Then I'll have to buy this one. I want 300 of them." "Do you have any sabers?" The staff member brought over several ordinary sabers. The steel was good, but the shape didn't resemble those used on the steppes. The cavalry here sometimes had to deal with targets wearing metal armor, so the blades were designed to enhance their stabbing capabilities, with straighter blades. Metal armor wasn't as common on the grasslands, so the emphasis was on cutting, resulting in more curved blades. This was a major manufacturer that supplied equipment to the Wesson army, producing imitation weapons. The saber Ozcan wanted would have to go elsewhere. Olive quickly led him to the display area of a weapons factory owned by a fellow villager. The owner had been a blacksmith in the Ghazi Empire's Imperial Guard. After being pulled from the water, he saw that the other officers were reluctant to return, so he chose not to return either. At the time, the military, needing weapons for the enemy forces, had allowed him to open a weapons factory, with the Wesson family owning a majority of the shares. He specialized in producing foreign weapons, which, after a little embellishment, were quite popular among idle young men. A noble from the kingdom of Gaul had just placed an order. Fellow villagers met, and they shot each other in the back. "That's outrageous," Ozcan glared at his fellow villager. "It's not like I don't know the market." The villager glanced around and whispered stealthily, "What are you calling it?" "The steel I'm giving you is made of high-quality steel used by the military. The kind that never rusts. If I'm discovered, I might end up hanging on the city walls." "Really?" Ozcan's eyes widened. "Weapons that never rust would surely sell like hotcakes." The villager swore confidently, "Let me tell you, at the beginning of the year, the army placed an order, and the idiot who wrote the order made a mistake with the numbers, so I have 500 extra sabers. I finally settled the account, and now these goods are mine. You understand?" Ozcan nodded, understanding. Not long after he placed the order and left, the villager repeated the same words to the merchant from the kingdom of Risenberg. It wasn't until 2 years later that Ozcan realized he'd been ripped off, when he was buying scale armor plates at the Four-Leaf Armor Factory's booth. Hoffman, having just returned to the booth, was frustrated. The wealthy merchants wanted a lot of goods, but only armor plates, claiming that armor weaving on the grasslands was the work of women at home, thus eliminating a profit margin. Ozcan was also frustrated. His funds were running low. He needed to buy daggers, helmets, and other items, as well as some medicine, so he saved as much as possible. The two of them didn't have time for lunch until after 2 in the afternoon. In the dining area at the edge of the exhibition area, Olive ordered a bottle of happy water and 3 servings of fried chicken nuggets, and Ozcan followed her lead and asked for his own. Ozcan was intently calculating the day's purchases and balances on paper, listing the delivery dates for various items so he could arrange his fleet. His purchases exceeded his expectations, leaving him short of ships, and the factory needed time to produce. So, he divided the goods into 2 parts, one to be delivered within a month and shipped before the water froze over in the winter, and the other to be delivered the following year after the river thawed. The emperor established a Ghazi Empire Chamber of Commerce here, using captives unwilling to return home as a voice between the 2 regions and to assist merchants back home with their business matters. Ozcan compiled a list of goods due for delivery next spring and later submitted it to the Chamber of Commerce along with a payment. They would then handle the delivery and storage in the warehouse, ready for shipment upon his arrival. When he finished, he looked up and saw Olive sipping an orange drink. He couldn't help but ask, "What are you drinking?" Olive replied smugly, "I won't tell you, it's a drink only available in the Wesson army." Ozcan asked, puzzled, "How did you get something from the army?" Olive blushed slightly, then said with an air of impatience, "Oh, someone I know gave it to me." Ozcan, realizing it was just a matter between young men, simply smiled. Not far away, a soldier on duty who had recently deserted was given a kick by Metzger, who laughed. After lunch, Ozcan went to the raw materials area, where he had his place. His son-in-law and several of his men were there, playing cards. "Why aren't you working?" Ozcan's face darkened. "Now's the time to make money, but no one's coming." "You didn't even bother asking the woolen clothing vendors if they wanted wool." His son-in-law immediately put down his cards and stood up, saying cheerfully, "Father-in-law, great news. 60% of our wool was certified 2nd grade, and 20% 1st grade. We sold for much more than we initially expected, and the herbs were all bought by the pharmaceutical factory. They even left us a booklet showing their large purchases. The sheepskin is just average, about as expected." Ozcan's son-in-law had been a warrior on the steppes. He had saved his life a few years ago, but because of an injury to his right hand, he couldn't hold a weapon. So Ozcan married one of his daughters to him and allowed him to join the caravan. He took the contract and check his son-in-law handed him. Like the other contracts he'd signed, they were both formalized, with clauses he'd anticipated and those he hadn't. There were 3 versions, the local German, the Purin, and the Ghazi. In case of disagreement, the Purin version would prevail. They all bought stamps and affixed them neatly to the top of the first page of the contract. These stamps were special editions from the First World Expo, becoming highly coveted collector's items. Ozcan calculated the total and found it was 20% more than expected. He pulled a thick stack of contracts he'd signed today from his briefcase and handed them to his son-in-law, saying, "Go to the bank now and make the transfer and repay the loan. Once the bank loan is settled, deliver the pledged goods immediately and try to collect the balance as soon as possible." He hadn't sold the wool, sheepskins, and herbs he'd brought in, so, like other merchants, he used them as collateral for a loan from Wesson Bank. The interest wouldn't accrue until the end of the year, but would start accruing next year. Repaying the bank quickly would allow them to deliver the wool and other goods more quickly, which would provide more money for more goods. Wesson Bank had set up a workstation there, and many people shared Ozcan's vision, leading to a long line. As dusk approached, and the expo was about to close, a large team of staff began visiting each stall, recording their sales figures. At dinner, Frederick got the summary data. The first day's transaction volume made him so excited that he kissed all the girls without even wiping his mouth. Chapter 389 The End of Life. 1034, the second day of the World's Fair, a momentous event unfolded, one everyone had anticipated. Within the Osmega Empire, the Imperial Palace, long isolated from the outside world, suddenly received official news: the Emperor had awakened. In the blink of an eye, half of the spies outside the palace fled, returning to report to their master, while the other half remained to await further updates. Ferdinand, who had been unconscious for days, reclined against the headboard with the help of his servants. He personally removed the feeding tube and declared, "I will no longer need it." His group of princes and princesses had already gathered around the bed. Before they could offer any words of comfort, the emperor declared, "There's no need to say more. Your own body knows. I won't see the sunset today. I told you not to speak before I finish, lest I lose my voice." The flickering flames in the fireplace, seemingly influenced by the atmosphere in the room, suddenly calmed. Ferdinand glanced at his children, a faint smile on his face. He nodded and said, "You are all good children, but there is only one throne. I hope those who are not chosen will not harbor resentment towards me, nor will they harbor grudges against their own blood. Although the empire is vast, it has begun to decay. I have dedicated my life to maintaining this house. Alice, I feel the greatest indignation towards your mothers." Ferdinand sighed at this. The Osmagian Empire seemed to be still flourishing, but in Bohemia, it was unable to defeat the Piast kingdom. A few years ago, they had missed the opportunity presented by Duke Wessen's defeat of 100,000 with only 800 men, fearing conspiracy. 100 years ago, they would have crushed them with absolute force, regardless of conspiracy or not. Military weakness was the first sign of the empire's decline, and some within the vassal states and the country began to harbor concerns. Ferdinand married and divorced repeatedly, and his divorced queens spent their remaining years in convents. After giving birth to princes and princesses, he did not rush to appoint an heir, which fostered expectations among the nobles everywhere, acting as a glue to maintain national stability. But the throne could only ultimately be occupied by one person, and it was hard to predict what the supporters of the other princes and princesses would do. With the exception of Marie, who withdrew from the competition due to her infertility, and Teresa, who had never entered the running, all the princes and princesses present suddenly tensed. Ferdinand rhythmically pulled the bell cord beside his bed and said, "My heir has already been chosen. The name is in the box behind the statue in the old church." Everyone suddenly understood. No wonder the magic gods and sword masters had moved to the palace chapel to play mahjong after their father fell into coma. Ferdinand smiled and said, "It was Frederick's idea. He was afraid I wouldn't wake up, and this harmonious family would end up in a bloodbath." The princes and princesses looked at each other. If it weren't for their father's previous order, they would have rushed to pledge their loyalty. This was a critical moment. They couldn't let down their guard. They might lose their crown, even if they only spoke of it. Who knew if that was a list in the church? After the first one, there was still someone else to come. Marie, on the other hand, was completely unconcerned. She sat on the edge of the bed, took her father's hand, and said, "Father, rest assured. If any of my blood relatives were to murder each other, I would not forgive them." Her father instead of emperor brought Ferdinand's brightest smile in decades. He patted her hand gently, pulled the bedside cord a few times, and the bedroom door swung open. In came Ferdinand's standard-bearer and sword-bearer. He was responsible for raising the emperor's banner on the battlefield, carrying the emperor's sword daily, and serving as an imperial envoy to deliver the emperor's decrees. He was an elderly man, dressed in formal attire today. Tears welled in his eyes as he touched Ferdinand's sword. Ferdinand said to him, "My old friend, I have so much to say to you, but I have no time. In my study there is a box wrapped in purple silk. Inside is a farewell letter for you. Please help me deliver it after I leave. Bring the sword here." Everyone present was shocked. Did the emperor intend to pass the throne to the Baron Mary? This posed a serious problem. If Mary succeeded to the throne, her heir would undoubtedly have to be chosen from among her younger relatives. Mary's brothers and sisters suddenly became interested. If their generation couldn't win, then they would take over the next generation. Fortunately, Ferdinand took his sword and placed it in Marie's hands, solemnly declaring, "I appoint you protector of the realm. If any of your brothers and sisters kill each other, wield this sword and slay them." Marie, clutching the swords of past emperors in both hands, knelt on one knee beside the bed, raised the sword above her head, and sobbed, "I will live up to your majesty's trust." Ferdinand patted the bedside, inviting her to sit up, and said with a smile, "If you can't defeat them, you can ask him for help." The other princes and princesses were reeling from this unexpected bombshell. The political structure of the empire had undergone a fundamental shift, but this only affected the imperial family. The other nobles had no reason to object and could only observe the situation with amusement. Especially the last part, "ask him for help," meant only one person to Marie, Frederick von Wesson. This was a serious problem. He needed to carefully consider his next move. "Ferdinand, observing the varying expressions on his children's faces, sighed inwardly, unsure whether his Colosseum-like upbringing and his attempts to curb his children's involvement with outsiders were right or wrong. He continued, I left a letter in the study about the future direction of the country. I want to emphasize here that I hope my successors will remember the following things, which are related to the life and death of the empire. Plant more Elizabeth potatoes, especially in the colder mountainous areas. As long as people have food to eat, there will be no problem. Wesson told me that Elizabeth potatoes may become sick and produce no crops in warm places, but not in low-temperature places. That is the last line of defense. Remember, the railway that Wesson proposed last year from Oak City through Mincing City and Wayne City, bypassing the White Mountains to the inland sea bay must be built. This railway is just the beginning. Remember, the size of the empire is determined by where the railway reaches. Those vassal states in the east have not been very obedient in recent years. We must make them obedient again. If they are disobedient, there is no need for them to exist. The royal army needs reform. Learn from Wesson. All these things require money. So let's learn how Wesson makes money. Don't make an enemy of Wesson. His future is limitless, and he could very well become the new emperor. You should form an alliance with him. The Rhine alliance can't accommodate him, and the Second Purian Empire could very well be restored to glory under his rule. By forming an alliance with him, our two families will be back to back, he to the west, we to the east, helping each other. You can handle this privately. Be careful of the Ghazi Empire. Fata is ambitious, yet patient. He knows how to delegate tasks he can't handle to those who can. He's a ferocious lion in favorable times, a venomous snake in the shadows. After all these instructions, fatigue washed over him, and he leaned back on the bed, panting heavily. Mary quickly said, Father, I'll get the medicine. Ferdinand said, Go to the refrigerator over there. Just because he couldn't speak didn't mean he couldn't show his affection through action. Suddenly, the refrigerator door was crowded with people. The princes and princesses thought the refrigerator contained some rare treasures, but they found only 2 bottles, one of happy water, the other of happy water. Bring them all here, His Majesty Ferdinand ordered. I'm dying soon, can't I enjoy myself a little before I die? The emperor emptied 2 bottles of happy water into the bottle, burped several times, and said cheerfully, feeling better. He pulled the bedside cord again, and after the bell rang, a servant entered with a tray containing several newspapers. Although Ferdinand had been bedridden for a long time, his access to external information had not been interrupted. He would have newspapers read to him every day when he was awake. The question arose, who would the emperor have the newspapers read to him at this time? The princes and princesses wondered, surely their father would not do anything useless at this moment? The news was no longer important. He would use this method to designate an heir. The final moment had arrived. Everyone stood at attention, determined not to be eliminated at this moment, their eyes filled with anticipation and nervousness. Anna, Ferdinand's voice was gentle. Read me the latest edition of the Wesson Daily and see what Frederick has been up to lately. The answer was finally revealed, and Princess Anna, the 9th princess, was so excited that her hands trembled and her face flushed. The unsuccessful candidates looked ashen, sighing inwardly. The astute ones quickly grasped the key to the future of the empire from the emperor's instructions. The 2 key priorities for the empire were to ally with Wesson to the west and consolidate its rule to the east. Anna and her half-brother, the 8th, had a strong base encompassing eastern vassal states and the southwestern territories of their mother's ancestral empire. Unlike the 8th, Anna had a close relationship with Wesson, even experiencing a period of negative distance. This was not to mention Anna's half-sister, Mary. The 2 sisters had a close relationship, and her close relationship with Wesson was well known. More importantly, she was the newly appointed protector of the realm. Anyone aiming for her sister would have to get past her first, potentially becoming a pawn in an attack. Everyone suddenly realized that in just 10 years, Wesson had grown into a formidable force capable of influencing world politics. Ferdinand, relieved of the immense burden, felt more energetic. Anna, calming her excitement, took the newspaper and sat down beside the bed to read. The latest edition was from the day before yesterday, August 14th. The front page headline was "The Angel of Victory statue unveiled. Duke Wesson delivers important speech." Ferdinand nodded and said, "Let me read what he said first. This little guy never fails to amaze me." Anna began reading. In late July of this year, construction began on the Creation bronze statue complex. Within a month, all 36 statues were completed. This is a remarkable achievement, a joint effort of all Wesson employees, and the perfect embodiment of our slogan, "Time is money, efficiency is life." Behind these achievements lies the implementation of a pay-for-more work system across all industries, a merit-based management recruitment system, a collaborative model that closely integrates university textbook knowledge with practical work, and the open recruitment of talent from all corners of the country, regardless of background. Dare to think, dare to try, dare to venture, dare to be the first in the world. This is the spirit of our Wesson people. It is this spirit that has attracted countless people who are eager to change their lives and pursue their dreams to flock to this land, creating the world's unique Wesson speed. Ferdinand held the empty bottle of happy water in his hand, with a slight smile on his lips. Every time Wesson spoke, the confidence and courage exuded between the lines, and the yearning for a better future, made him feel as if he had returned to his youth. Once upon a time, he also had a dream that he was determined to pursue all his life, to build the empire into an unprecedented glory. But that was decades ago. White columns of smoke rose from the palace and reached the sunset. Bells rang in the churches of the city, horns were blown on the city walls, and the telegraph station sent a message to the surroundings through the public channel: His Majesty Ferdinand, the Emperor of the Osmega Empire, has come to an end. Chapter 390 Rest Day. The World's Fair went on as planned. Frederick only appeared at the opening ceremony on the first day, and thereafter, he simply focused on the total transaction volume each day. Merchants attending the World's Fair didn't stop at the fairgrounds, they inevitably explored other locations. That day, the zoo outside Wessenberg was packed with people. Foreign merchants, tourists, and local children on holiday leaned over the bars in front of the cages, curious yet fearful. Among the crowd were two unremarkable young men wandering around, like ordinary tourists. The man was wearing the dark gray pseudo-military uniform currently popular in Wesson. Aside from the number of buttons and the pattern on it, it was almost identical to the regular uniform of the Wesson infantry, and it looked very energetic on those with a good figure. The young-looking woman next to him wore the traditional local light blue long skirt, a matching mid-sleeved shirt and vest, and a dark blue plaid apron tied in front. The locals knew the woman's apron bow was tied in the front, as married women would tie it at the side, and widowed women would tie it behind them. So the boutonniere seller approached with a wooden tray and said, "Sir, buy a boutonniere for your beautiful girlfriend." The boutonniere seller, judging by her experience, knew the couple was out together, seemingly close but actually distant, suggesting one of them was interested in the other. Generally, the man is more likely to be scheming, so if someone asks the man for something, he'll inevitably buy it out of respect. However, Frederick, wearing makeup, smiled and said to the boutonniere, "She's not my girlfriend, she's my mother." The boutonniere seller was stunned, and the couple walked away before she could recover. Psyche said to Frederick expressionlessly, "I'm so sorry you're taking a rare break and visiting the zoo with an old woman like me." Frederick smiled and replied, "It's okay. An old man is a treasure to have in the family. I haven't been asking for your advice much lately." He was off today. Maria and the ladies from the Duchy of Mainz were at the swimming pool, Susan had her monthly medical school exam, and Lulu was at the shipyard. Psyche was the only one free. As they talked, they arrived at the nearby Salamander Pavilion. It was a 3 to 4 meter square of sandy, desert-like ground, with a large pane of glass facing the guests. A half-meter long, brown-yellow salamander lay on the stone, watching the audience. It was feeding time. Visitors, who had paid extra, were instructed by the staff to drop a plump rat from a hole in the ceiling. The salamander, noticing its breakfast, immediately ran over and blew a column of fire from a meter away, instantly turning the rat into a half-cooked meal. The spectators outside the window gasped in delight, and the visitor who had thrown the rat was even more excited. Psyche said to Frederick, "This kind of fire lizard lives in the desert south of the Ghazi Empire. The fine spines on its back from the neck to the tail are like swords, which can whip close prey. These spines are brown at first, and about one of them turns red every year. Fire lizards over 10 years old will grow a blood bag the size of a match head next to their heart. The blood inside is rich in the essence of the fire element. It enters the blood vessels to enhance its strength when saving its life. The fire element in this blood is very suitable for human absorption and is very effective in treating frostbite injuries. Moreover, the older the fire lizard, the more effective its blood is. The medicine made from the blood of a lizard over 30 years old costs 10 times the same weight of gold. Rich people keep some for emergencies. Its meat is fishy and spicy and not delicious. Frederick said after hearing the last sentence. What a pity. The two walked to the nearby bear pond again. The white bear from the dark land in the north was standing 4 or 5 meters tall and waving to the tourists. Soon a fish flew over. The merchants, who came from the same place as White Bear, were a little weepy. Back home, this guy was known for his brutality, but here, with free food and lodging, he even acted cute. After looking at White Bear, the two of them went to the aquarium. It was called an aquarium, but besides a few turtle ponds, it actually displayed numerous large fish tanks, both freshwater and saltwater. The tanks contained colorful fish, as well as aquatic plants, corals, and other decorative items. With a touch of nostalgia, Frederick spoke to Psyche in the language of his past life. I used to have a colleague who was interplanted aquariums. He lived in an urban village, and his rooftop was filled with aquariums. He had more fish than the flower and bird market. I learned all this from him. Psyche listened with a faint smile. Frederick sighed and continued, his little girl is quite cute, but a bit clueless. She believed the claim that soy sauce is salty cola. There was a large piece of ginger in the braised pork at the construction site cafeteria once, and I told her it was a spicy chicken drumstick. After she finished eating it, she asked me why it had no bones. Psyche's smile gradually faded. She needed to start growing larger ginger roots, the current ones were too small. When Frederick was alone with her, he would occasionally reminisce about his past life, as if to prove that his life wasn't just a dream. He watched the schools of tiny fish and colorful shrimp in the aquarium grazing on the driftwood, not noticing the change in Psyche's expression. Back then, the concept of ecosystems didn't exist, but that didn't stop him from setting up an ecological aquarium to house ornamental fish, simply by rotating the fish frequently. Colorful fish weren't everywhere, and the anemones swaying with the current were even rarer. The high number of tourists here boosted glass sales. After inspecting the 2 fish tanks, Frederick was told by Psyche, next year, you're going to the Kingdom of Gaul to compete in the Knights tournament. You need to start training now. They have a rich history there, and you might be at a disadvantage. Frederick thought she had a point. The world is full of extraordinary people, so it's not surprising that he, with his limited experience, would fail miserably. After the World Expo this year, apart from a trip to the Duchy of Bavaria to attend the annual meeting of the Upper Reaches Cooperation Organization, there was little else to do. Since the 3 parties were cooperating smoothly, the meeting consisted of some formalities, some food and drink, while the details were handled by his subordinates. The controversy sparked by the female tractor driver had subsided with the arrival of the World Expo. Now everyone was discussing how to make money. Frederick thought this was a good thing. Ideological struggles don't happen overnight. After all, the seeds had been sown. Everyone needed to calm down and reflect on the situation. The next time these topics arose, they would undoubtedly lead to even more intense clashes. There was no rush regarding the Elba Pact organization. For the lesser nobles, such a major diplomatic shift required deep reflection. The meeting would be held in February of next year. The next 6 months would be relatively easy for him, as he only needed to grasp the big picture and focus on improving his own abilities. As Frederick pondered, they left the aquarium and entered the bird section. The most famous feature was the massive steel aviary, 50 meters in diameter and over 10 meters high. Its structure was a miracle of sheer strength. Inside, trees were planted and a multitude of colorful birds were kept. Many wealthy individuals would rent out the entire area to enjoy the show. Frederick wasn't particularly interested and asked Psyche, how do you think I should train? Psyche's lips curled slightly as she said, I'll give you a set of training equipment tomorrow. Come on, she said, pointing to a row of stalls not far away. Let's go get something to eat. Frederick was filled with anticipation, and spent the rest of the day wondering what training methods she would come up with. The next morning, Frederick remained silent, looking before him at the 5-kilogram boxer briefs, the 15-kilogram long-sleeved t-shirt and long johns, and the 2-kilogram pair of socks. Chapter 391, Taking Exams for Fun. The official documents announcing Ferdinand's death and Anna's accession to the throne reached Frederick the day before the World's Fair. Crown Prince Rudolf, the de facto regent of the Confederation of the Rhine, appointed the Archduke of Bavaria as his plenipotentiary representative to attend the funeral and coronation ceremony. Frederick wrote an official diplomatic letter to the new empress overnight, along with personal letters to Anna, Marie, and Teresa. The next day, he arranged for a delegation, led by Minister of Administration Frick, with Foreign Minister Christian as his deputy and Grand Steward Afu as his personal representative, to arrive in München by hot airship to pick up the Archduke of Bavaria and his entourage before proceeding to Wien. Fata and other leaders, fortunately catching up, also sent their own representatives. For ordinary people in the canton of Wesson, the change of emperor in a neighboring country was merely news. They went about their business, and after the World's Fair, they immediately had important work to do. This fair is truly remarkable. 3 days after the fair, Fata, while consuming breakfast in the Wesson Daily, was inspired to follow suit after seeing the statistics listed. He was still staying in the same hotel he'd stayed in upon his arrival, but had reserved the entire place after the arrival of the domestic staff. Unlike the previous few, he now had over 10 slave girls serving him breakfast, along with attendants, guards, butlers, and secretaries, making the dining room quite crowded. The visitors to the World's Fair had spent all their friendship bonds, with a total transaction volume reaching over 12 million florins, an unprecedented feat that easily surpassed Venice. Fata calculated that the 0.5% stamp tax alone amounted to approximately 60,000 florins, all in cash. This would provide a welcome relief to the already strained finances of the canton of Wesson. Record, he said, and a clerk in a corner of the dining room immediately took note of the emperor's instructions. The empire will issue a royal stamp tax, modeled after the canton of Wesson, and the tax will be distributed by region. The Gazi Empire was far larger than the canton of Wesson, with numerous ports and commercial cities. This tax was voluntary and could be collected even in vassal territories, making it a significant source of funding for the imperial family. He wasn't the only one. Little Louis, Kosdorf, and the others had made the same decision. After breakfast, Fata stretched, had a slave girl dress him in the popular three-piece suit of the region, and then, clutching a briefcase, he left the house without anyone following him. He was a tourist, eager to join in on any fun. On the opening day of the World's Fair, he'd managed to get a chance to take the civil service exam for the state of Wesson. He found the exam quite interesting, so he took it, and he also had some thoughts about the official recruitment process. Frederick had let him go, saying he had the guts to stay here and work a 9-to-5 job instead of returning to be emperor. Fata had booked a car the day before and arrived at the middle school a few blocks away. Frederick had instructed the exam site not to offer any special treatment to this candidate. Half an hour before the exam room was due, a group of people, clutching their books, made a final stand outside the cordon at the bottom of the school building. "You're here too." Fata noticed that little Louis had also arrived, along with his secretary, Armand. Little Louis said, "Let's have some fun too." Fata said with regret, "What a shame. There's no imperial exam. What subject are you taking?" Little Louis replied, "We're taking the tax exam. The tax system here is worth studying." Fata said, "Me too. The civil service exam in Wesson State uses a 2+1 format, consisting of 2 general subjects, the administrative skills test and the essay, plus 1 specialized subject. Different departments, such as taxation, agriculture, and police, require different specialized subjects. Candidates haven't yet chosen their positions. When the results are released, they will receive a report card and a passing score for the general subjects. Only those who pass will proceed to the next step. Candidates take their report cards to the relevant departments to register. Each department will set an interview threshold based on the applicant scores, from highest to lowest. Departments that don't fill their first round will have a second round, which will accept candidates regardless of the specialized subject until the quota is filled." Fata pulled a golden box from his bag, opened it, took a spiritual pill, chewed it, and motioned for little Louis and Armand to have one as well. Exclamation mark. "What is this? It's so bitter." Little Louis thought it was sweet candy, but it was incredibly bitter. Fata's prank was a success, and he said with a smile, "It's a spirit pill, probably extracted from tea leaves, to keep you alert. Come back for it before the afternoon exam." Little Louis shook his head and said, "No, I'd rather pinch my legs." The two took out their admission tickets and discovered they were in the same exam room, apparently a deliberate arrangement. They chatted for a while about legends like choosing the longest questions you don't know and taking 3 exams a day is to get used to working overtime. When the bell rang, they walked into the exam room with the other candidates and dropped their bags off at the baggage storage area at the front of the room. Photography hadn't been invented yet, so fingerprints were used to verify candidate information. The invigilator held a form with a candidate's fingerprint, which had been recorded when they registered, and the candidate's signature underneath. After verifying the recorded fingerprint, they pressed the same fingerprint in the blank space next to it and then held it up to the sun to identify it. When the bell rang, the invigilator invited several students to come forward and check the seals on their exam envelopes. Fatty and little Louis didn't sign their names like everyone else, instead stamping their envelopes with their official rings. Centuries later, this seal would fetch the price of several luxury sports cars at auction. As the exam papers, answer sheets, scratch paper, and stationery were distributed, the invigilator read out the exam rules to the students, followed by instructions on how to use the answer sheets. The answer sheets were manually marked, using a cutout tool made of transparent plastic sheet to clearly indicate which answers were correct and which multiple-choice questions were correct. Fatty was well aware of this. He had spent the previous few days at the World Expo and spent his evenings in the hotel reviewing past exam papers, and his scores on the objective questions were quite good. The bell rang, and Fatty picked up his pencil and began answering. The morning exam was the administrative skills test, the first part of which was about language comprehension and expression. Fatty had only recently studied Germanic, but since arriving here, reading the newspaper daily had significantly improved his reading comprehension skills. Since it was similar to what he saw in the newspaper, he chose it. The second part was a math problem. Sure enough, Hans, who was simultaneously pumping and filing the pool, appeared again. Fatty thought to himself that if this guy came to the Ghazi Empire, he would definitely be punished by being made to lick the soles of a sheep's feet. This type of problem was difficult to understand at first, but when the pool was replaced with a treasury and the water in and out with gold coins, it became clear immediately. The third part had several types of judgment and reasoning. The first was the sequencing of events. The first question was, 1. Two birds were singing in a tree. 2. The antelope was frightened and fled. 3. The pig leopard was lurking in the bushes by the river. 4. The antelope walked towards the riverbank. 5. The cheetah jumped up and startled two birds. The four options were A 1, 2, 4, 5, 2B 3, 1, 4, 5, 2C 4, 3, 1, 5, 2D 3, 4, 1, 5, 2. Fatty hesitated for a long time between B and E, and finally chose B. This type of question was followed by common sense judgment and deductive reasoning, but some of the common sense questions were a bit difficult for Fatty. For example, which of green slime, leftover dinner bones, silt from the bottom of the fish pond, or pig's blood couldn't be used as fertilizer for farmland? Fatty knew that bones were collected for fertilizer in Wessenland province, and he'd heard that silt was a good fertilizer when he visited a fish farming village, but he wasn't sure which made the most sense, green slime or pig's blood. He counted and chose the one with the most letters. The final, fourth section, data analysis, was the easiest for Fatty. He'd been learning how to analyze documents and intelligence since he was a child, doing the same thing when reading newspapers, and his accuracy rate on real exam questions exceeded 90%. Those who achieve great things are meticulous and careful, and Fatty was completely focused on the questions, as if he were handling documents in the palace. Little Louis, however, had a problem. "Give me a cup of tea." Little Louis thought he was in his office, but his secretary, Armand, stood up automatically. The invigilator, having learned their identities in advance, hurried over to whisper something. The two men were suddenly embarrassed. Fatty simply smiled and began marking his answers on the answer sheet. At 11 o'clock sharp, the morning exam concluded, and after handing in their papers, the candidates hurried out for lunch and a break. The essay test began at 2 p.m. Fatty's staff had previously booked a private room at a nearby bookstore, and he invited little Louis and the others there for lunch and a rest. The afternoon exam began, and the actual test takers in the exam room gasped upon seeing the questions. The essay test presents a number of materials on a specific topic. Students must summarize and analyze the materials, propose countermeasures, implement plans, and develop a compelling argument. This topic is often the focus of the upcoming government work. Fatty and the others, among them, assumed this year's theme would be related to the recent war. Duke Wessenland's speeches, or the recently concluded World Expo. However, contrary to everyone's expectations, the topic was regional economy. Fatty frowned. His keen observation and his experience at the World Expo allowed him to uncover the true theme hidden within the material. The pie presented by the World Expo was a huge boon for Wessenland's territory, but not everyone could share, which had caused discontent among some. Emperors were known for their mastery of telegraphing, So it seemed likely that signs of trouble had emerged within Wesson, and they were serious. With this understanding in mind, the task became easier. Fatty recalled the news he had read, composing sentences and phrases in a manner similar to the language used in the newspaper. His pen produced a neat, printed text that was almost identical to that in the newspaper. At 5 p.m., the exam ended. As soon as little Louis emerged from the exam room, he asked Fatty for a spirit pill. Despite the bitter taste, he chewed it up and swallowed it, complaining, "It would be nice if this exam wasn't timed. There's so little time, it's simply not enough." Fatty smiled and said, "That's part of the exam. It requires quick decision-making." Outside the exam center, many people were setting up stalls selling various mental refreshments. The professional exam would begin at 7 p.m. If the total score was tied, the professional exam would be the only one to be considered. He couldn't afford to take it lightly. For Fatty, the professional exam was purely about participation. Many people who studied taxation couldn't fully grasp the knowledge, let alone him. The exam was over, and the exhausted candidates emerged from the room. Some smiled cheerfully, telling their companions that they'd guessed the questions correctly. Others burst into tears as they walked, indicating they hadn't done well. After leaving the exam room, Fatty walked back to his hotel alone, wondering if he could learn from this model. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 392, Issues of Regional Development. Late August and early September, after the civil service exam, is the season when apples begin to ripen. Northwest of Wiesenberg, just outside Hausen, lies a vast apple orchard, originally owned by Frederick's mother's family. On the last day off in August, Frederick brought everyone here to pick apples. Many people were there today. In addition to Maria, Lilu, and Susan, there was also Frederick's senior sister, Katie, and her family, the castle's three great maids, head maid Kalpo, personal secretary Taro, and head cook Oxo, as well as high-ranking government officials and the families of local wealthy merchants and factory owners. Adults and older children, dressed in comfortable clothing, each carrying a basket, searched the trees in groups of 3 or 4 for the reddest and largest apples. While picking apples, everyone had to be wary of Dawn, who, along with her boyfriend and Maria's unicorn, would pick the apples from other people's baskets. Maria's 3-headed dog also followed him, barking occasionally, and Dawn would toss an apple. The orchard was filled with a melodious chirping of birds. Pet birds were a trend in Wessex County these days, and the birds, with their dazzling plumage and melodious calls, from the southern forests could fetch several gold coins. Today, these wealthy individuals had brought their birds to show off. Psyche had also arrived, but she was at a table with the children, performing an apple-tossing show. While ordinary performers might toss 3 or 5 apples, she was tossing apples as high as 3 or 4 stories, and the volume kept growing. The wind shifted, and the orchard was filled with the aroma of barbecue. Katie hadn't gone apple picking, citing a trauma from growing up picking oranges as a source of discomfort. Instead, she and a few older women were skewering meat for the grill. Not far away, by the lake, her father, Richardnell, was fishing with her son. At noon, everyone returned from picking fruit and began to eat and drink. A long table by the lake, set aside for the fruit pickers, was now covered with a tablecloth and laden with barbecue, bread, cake, pastries, and drinks. Frederick sat down at the head of the table and called a group over. They included 5 officials: Minister of Commerce Adam, Governor of Wessenamet, Governor of Putz Franz the Elder, Governor of Fea Matthias, and Governor of Langny Neuer, along with several factory representatives, including Hoffman and Rhea. Everyone understood immediately that the Duke of Wesson was already aware of some of the previous events, and today they would hold an informal discussion. The dozen or so people took their seats and ate and drank as usual. When they were almost done, Frederick took a sip of freshly squeezed apple juice and set the glass down with a heavy hand. A sudden hush fell around the table. Frederick said, "I've invited everyone here today to discuss something. Everyone knows what it is. Those who don't know have no right to be here. Those of you who are here today are friends from the industry. First, let me tell you about a decision made yesterday by the Education Department." After everyone perked up, he continued, "As you all know, after 10 years of development, education in the canton of Wesson has achieved brilliant results. Basic education coverage is close to 100%. Next year's Education Act will legally establish 6 years of compulsory education. Literacy, secondary education, vocational education, and higher education have also achieved remarkable success. The Duchy of Wesson will be established next year. The education levels of the 3 newly admitted cantons, France, Asia, Lankney, and Puits, are far behind those of Wesson, and there is much room for improvement. He said this and took a sip of apple juice from his glass. Hoffman then said, I feel deeply about this. I have experienced it. In recent years, my factory has expanded, and many relatives and friends from my hometown have come to live with me. I'd love to take them in, but under the Franken family's rule, we serfs have no chance to learn. We're all illiterate, unable to understand safety regulations or work schedules. Some have only ever seen copper coins and don't know how to convert currency. To do that, I'll need to spend at least 3 months in literacy classes, having them memorize factory rules and regulations, and then learn to read various forms. It'll take at least a year to become qualified workers. Several other factory owners nodded in agreement, having encountered similar problems before. Frederick nodded and said, the Education Department will now formulate and implement the Spark Plan, aiming to cover basic education in 3 states within 3 years. Within the second 5-year plan, starting next year, we'll further open up the teacher qualification exams and principal qualification exams, encouraging the establishment of schools at all levels and levels in the 3 states. With that, he picked up a skewer of barbecue and began to eat, then gave the floor to the others. Everyone present understood Frederick's intention. Ria asked, Sir, I plan to build a new fugitive flour processing plant in Zinsau. Do you mean to encourage us to do so? Her fugitive flour had received a large order at the World Expo, necessitating an expansion of production. However, like other factories that needed to expand, she had received invitations from several governors almost simultaneously. Expansion came at a cost, and she didn't have the capital to open factories in every state. But if she refused, she feared retaliation, which would be problematic. While the status of factory owners in Wesson had improved, it had only been in recent years, and they still feared the nobles. Frederick nodded and, between bites, said, Let me establish a principle. I support the establishment of a factory in Zinsau. I suggest the local government also implement policies and strengthen supporting infrastructure to support this. Currently, Zinsau's economy lags behind Wesson in all aspects. Investing there, and locals raising funds to build factories, will help boost the local economy, improve people's living standards, and increase tax revenue, but caused several officials to sit up straight. Frederick continued, developing the regional economy doesn't mean uniform development everywhere. We can't embrace egalitarianism. Local officials can't just focus on their own plate, wanting everything. They need to think from a global perspective. He then took a piece of bread, spread it with jam, and began to eat. The 4 governors present felt a little embarrassed. Their leader had just criticized them. They were not fools. Ahmed and Matthias were both Golden Durian Award winners. If Neuer had been stupid, he wouldn't have become Minister of Taxation before becoming governor. Old Franz, a knight by birth, had no brains and would have died on the battlefield. However, no matter how brilliant a person is, their thinking ability and mindset will be affected when their personal interests are involved. Old Franz took a sip of wine, put down his glass, and said in a deep voice, I am here to reflect on myself. I have indeed made the mistake that Your Excellency just mentioned. He was the most prestigious elder in Wesson County, a member of the Wesson State Parliament's presiding officers, and the president of the Football Association. He held the highest prestige among the officials. Although he knew he had become governor of Puits not for political ability but for merit, and initially planned to slack off until retirement, the taste of power was irresistible, and he harbored the ambition to prove his civil and military prowess. He also knew that transferring part of the heavy machinery plant to the mountainous and forested Puits was outrageous, but the tax revenue from the plant was enough to drive officials crazy. Now that he was being criticized, he was the first to stand up and defend his lord's authority. With old Franz taking the lead, Ogilvy followed suit and admitted his fault. The label of minister candidate made him even more dizzy, losing his usual academic composure. To protect his own interests, he secretly thwarted those who wanted to invest in the new state. Frederick listened quietly to their self-examinations, feeling satisfied with their attitude. However, this review alone couldn't solve the problem. A region's economic development isn't just about the governor's personal interests, It also affects all aspects of the local community. If the fundamental issues aren't addressed, specific work will revert to its old ways. Chapter 393 Industry Segmentation. The Minister of Commerce of Wesson State was quite unique among his higher-ranking officials. Some jokingly said he treated Wesson State like a test field, measuring crops monthly. Frederick had many ideas from his past life, but due to limited conditions, not all of them could be implemented here. It was precisely because of this first-hand data that Adam was able to refine and implement Frederick's ideas with precision and focus, identifying and addressing any gaps. He rejected some of Frederick's overly ambitious and unrealistic ideas and transformed them into practical, detailed plans. Frederick nodded to Adam, signaling his turn. Adam cleared his throat and spoke in his Anglican accent, as if giving a lecture. The Duke proposed the concept of regional development many years ago, but the territory was small before, so it wasn't taken seriously. He met with me 2 months ago to discuss it in detail and predicted some of the current problems. Please remember that economic development has its own laws. The tulip incident is the best example. It was precisely because the Duke recognized early on that it conformed to the law of inevitable failure that he made the relevant decisions. The thinking behind developing the economies of various regions must be clear. There are several main points. First, respect objective laws, not just economic laws, but also laws of geography, climate, products, and manpower. Second, leverage regional advantages. We must conduct thorough research to identify advantages within our jurisdiction that others don't have. Third, we must ensure the basic survival of the people. We are now building an unprecedented and beautiful new world, where everyone has a job that allows them to live a good life and no longer become bandits. He said this while getting a drink. Hoffman nodded and said, "Yes, there used to be a few gangs of bandits near our area. Most of them were farmers and serfs who couldn't make a living. Now they are willing to live a down-to-earth life." After he finished speaking, everyone laughed. This story had been reported in the newspapers, with Hasenfraz as the main character. Adam nodded and continued, "My suggestion is that each region prioritize the development of specialized industries, especially leveraging the advantages of raw material production locations. This should attract investment through tax incentives and the establishment of specialized industrial zones. My research has revealed that many factories outsource the production of common parts to smaller, specialized factories. While such a small factory might not be enough to make a person wealthy, it's enough to provide a comfortable life. I have an idea. What if we could consolidate these similar small factories into one industrial zone? First, they could leverage economies of scale to lower costs when procuring raw materials. Second, convenient transportation would lower costs. Third, it would be convenient for merchants to come and purchase. Old Franz then asked, "If that happens, and some of them produce the same thing, will there be a fight?" He had a point. There had been cases in the newspapers where a simple business war was nothing more than slapping a competitor in the face with frozen fish. "That's not a problem." The one who responded was a businessman sitting next to Hoffman. "We make nails. There are many kinds of nails. We have discussed it together and each company will specialize in one kind. So as not to steal other people's business." Hoffman also said, "The hinges we produce are divided into several major categories according to different usage environments, and there are even more types if we subdivide them." Frederick nodded and said, "It's good that you have this awareness. This is the right direction of development. It's not just hardware processing. Many industries can be subdivided in this way to avoid repeated competition. Our products can't just stay at the current level. Other countries will definitely find ways to learn. We must always be one step ahead." Industry segmentation is conducive to factories accumulating experience and improvements, and forming a good reputation. If we do it well, this business can be passed on for 200 or 300 years. After he finished speaking, he picked up a skewer of barbecue and started eating. After wearing dozens of kilograms of clothes recently, his body was burdened and his appetite also increased. "One more point," he said as he ate. "A prerequisite for the development of industry and commerce is reduced transportation costs. Road construction needs to be prioritized." After Frederick finished, Old Franz said, "We now border the Bohemian region, where wars have been ongoing for years, and many people have been displaced. Road construction requires a large amount of manpower. The strong laborers of the Duchy of Franconia and the Regensburg Confederation have largely fled to Wesson. Now it's the new governor's turn to find a new labor force." Frederick nodded and said, "Okay, let's look at the migrant workers of the Helvetic Confederation. The Helvetic Confederation is a mountainous region with limited land and limited food production. Many people have resorted to mercenary service to make a living. 8 years ago, during the Six-Day Defense, a large number of mercenaries were captured. Frederick had them working on the road. They found road construction much more rewarding than being mercenaries, and after their terms expired, not only did they not return, but they brought people back, forming village-based construction teams. Frederick saw their hard work and ability, their significant contributions to the development of Wesson, and naturally treated them well. After 5 years of legal employment and tax payment, and with no criminal record, they could enjoy the same benefits as local residents, such as being able to order milk and attend elementary school for their children at a very low cost. After 10 years, they could even run for local council seats. The inhabitants of Bohemia were anti-peoples, with their own language and customs. Having been under the rule of the Osmagian Empire for nearly 100 years, many spoke German as a second language, allowing them to integrate more quickly than the people of the Helvetic Confederation. In the Wesson government, the current Minister of Education, Father Arms, was from Bohemia. Frederick suddenly reflected. The current government's household registration system was still very chaotic, with no unified department. It seemed necessary to establish a Ministry of Civil Affairs. Furthermore, the permanent residence permits and naturalization procedures for migrant workers also needed further development. He would put this aside for now and hand it over to the executive yuan for later. Today, he would focus on regional economic development. At that moment, old Franz said, "There are many trees in the canton of Putz. There's a young man named Thomas in the pine forest area who's doing great work. I've specifically asked him to help me oversee the development of the forest area. According to what the Master and Lord Adam just said, timber processing should be vigorously developed there." Frederick nodded and said, "Go find Saul, the one I invited to the castle a while ago. He invented a glue that can be used to piece together broken wood into planks." Old Franz set another example, and Frederick offered him some advice to help him avoid detours. Ahmet also came to his senses. Given Frederick's temperament, he believed that to rise high, he had to be harmonious. He was familiar with factory construction and began to offer advice to the others. Frederick watched and ate from the side. In such meetings, his role was to set the tone, but he rarely participated in the subsequent free-flowing discussions. The next step would be for the Ministry of Commerce to issue a guiding document on today's matter, and the governors of each state would then return to formulate policies based on the document's principles. At this moment, laughter emanated from the lake. Many people, wearing life jackets, were rowing in fishermen's boats. Frederick suddenly remembered that he was still the Minister of the Navy of the Rhine Confederation. Naval construction was about to begin. Since he had some free time, he decided to start with a design of warships. Chapter 394 is still in the rough stage. The day after their apple orchard outing, Vanessa handed Frederick his September work schedule for review. Frederick, as was his custom, spent at least a portion of the month conducting field research and some time attending departmental meetings. He decided his travels, leaving his schedule blank. Frederick pondered the possibility that the implosion engine might be the most suitable for building new warships. He planned to visit Diesel's engine factory tomorrow to see how the engine was progressing. Diesel's implosion engine was being refined. After extensive field testing, single and two-cylinder engines under 50 horsepower were expected to enter mass production next year. Current production volumes were low, leading to a growing number of young men with will-o'-the-wisp flares along the riverbank, including the girl next to Frederick. To understand the implosion engine's performance, he naturally had to operate it himself. After dinner that day, Frederick held Susan in his arms and softly said, "I'll borrow your motorcycle tomorrow." Susan blinked her large golden eyes and whispered, "Do you have a driver's license?" Frederick was silent for a moment, then asked, "Will a horse-drawn carriage license or a tractor license be okay?" Susan shook her head. A few years ago, there had been over 10 accidents involving animal-drawn vehicles caused by improper operation in a single month. Frederick had even arranged for a horse-drawn carriage driver's license, and he'd taken one himself just for fun. A tractor license was even easier to get, as his was the first license number. Thinking about it, it wasn't surprising that a motorcycle driver's license was also available. But there was a problem. Frederick asked the girl, "Do you have a driver's license?" Susan nodded. "No." Frederick frowned. "How old are you?" "You're old enough to get a driver's license. For one thing, carriage and tractor licenses have age restrictions, and motorcycles are certainly no exception. Susan blushed, hugging Frederick's neck as she whispered, "I'm an adult now, I can. By the end of her I can." Her voice was so low even Frederick couldn't hear her, her cheeks as red as a ripe apple. Frederick pinched her nose. The girl was 15 now, but considering the motorcycle's appearance, she'd probably only been 14 when she took the driver's license test. The authorities must have made an exception for her, considering she'd been their lover since childhood. Without a license, you can't drive. Frederick wouldn't break his own rules. He asked, "Then is it okay for me to ride around the training ground?" Susan recalled the traffic rules. That was fine. Arriving at the garage, Frederick noticed several motorcycles. It suddenly occurred to him that he'd promised his junior sister one for her at Citrus Island late last year. The most impressive-looking motorcycle resembled a sports car from a previous life, with license plates reading 00001 inches and even a serial number resembling WA. Susan pointed to the white sports car and said, "This is Teacher Psyche's bike. She built it herself, and it's the fastest." Frederick frowned. The negative influence this old will-o'-the-wisp had on the youth was immeasurable. The second-hand motorcycle here was black, a Harley-Davidson. It belonged to Alfu. Frederick learned from Susan that Taro, Vanessa, and the others now had their own motorcycles, but they weren't will-o'-the-wisp sports cars, but low-powered scooters. Susan's own motorcycle was also quite impressive, gleaming golden when it drove. Frederick took Susan's helmet from the wall, adjusted it, put it on, and pushed the bike onto the training ground to start it up. In his previous life, he had ridden his family's motorcycle, but motorcycles were banned, so he didn't get a license because he was old enough. Susan stood nervously at the edge of the training ground, even preparing her first aid kit, only to discover that Frederick was an even better driver than she was. After riding for half an hour, Frederick parked his bike on a stone bench beside the training ground and sat there to study it. "This car is similar to the motorcycle I had in my previous life. It's equipped with a 2-cylinder implosion engine, 3 forward gears, and no reverse. The key is also quite interesting, a steel plate with 6 magic crystal cylinders protruding from either side, of varying sizes. Once inserted into the keyhole, the 2 panels close, with holes corresponding to the magic crystals on the panels. Only when they align perfectly will it start. This car has many problems, primarily because it's heavy. The gearbox is louder than the engine, the speedometer is actually a wind speed meter, and the vibrations are severe. The speed isn't as high as I expected, but the brakes are generally good. Overall, everything else besides the engine isn't up to par, it's rather crude and leaves much room for improvement. There's no rush for the motorcycle. With the current road conditions, it's too narrow to drive in the city, and the roads outside of Wessex are too bad to go fast. It'll only become popular in New Jersey after the roads are repaired in a few years. Right now, it's just a novelty for the wealthy." Susan lay on Frederick's back and said, "Let's go for a drive." "Okay," Frederick nodded. "I'll get my driver's license when I have time." Susan put her arm around Frederick's neck from behind and said, "I'll drive, you sit in the back. We can go now." As she spoke, she rubbed her chin against Frederick's crown, muttering a kitten-like meow spell and rubbing her face against Frederick's. Frederick didn't respond, so Susan meowed and burrowed into his arms, nudging him with her cheek. Thousands of years ago, the kingdom of Kush had a community that practiced meow. Although the religion has disappeared, some meow spells have survived. The spell Susan used now was to ask her lover to agree to her request, and the basic principle was to act cute. "I'd rather not go," Frederick shook his head. "You're not strong enough right now. The bike is heavy. You can ride it by yourself, but with me, it's hard to control," Susan whined, looking lost. If she had cat ears, they would surely droop. Frederick smiled and kissed her forehead. Traffic safety was no joke, the bike would be fine here. He stood up and carried the girl back to the castle. Susan was clearly upset and kept scratching Frederick's face. With his arms free, Frederick lowered his head to bite her nose. Susan turned her head to the side. Her nose was fine, but her ear was. The next morning, after breakfast, everyone went about their business. Frederick checked that there were no urgent documents from last night, so he asked Vanessa to prepare the bike for the trip to Diesel's factory. Diesel had an unexpected guest today. Fatty had recently been on a trip to the Duchy of Mainz, and Hawken hadn't accompanied him, but instead showed up. Diesel said regretfully, "Your design is ingenious, but we don't know how to use it." Chapter 395, still useful. After receiving the Emperor's mission to win the Golden Durian Award, Hakan began to get busy. No matter where one lives, social connections are essential, and winning the award requires cultivating good relationships with colleagues. Who knows, they might disappear one day, perhaps to become judges. Hakan is an expert in air magic. In Wesson, the most renowned figure in this field is undoubtedly Diesel, the developer of the core components and implosion mechanism for the magic air gun. If one wanted to establish good relationships in this field, the best place to start would be with him. To this end, Hakan studied the magic circle in the implosion mechanism on the tricycle, made a series of optimizations, and then approached Diesel with confidence. To his surprise, Diesel praised the new air explosion magic circle highly, but ultimately declared it unusable. Hakan was displeased, initially assuming plagiarism, and refused to pay the patent fees. Just then, Frederick walked into the office. After greeting him, Hakan asked Diesel, "Why can't we use it on the tricycle?" He had previously learned that patent fees here were paid outright and based on unit sales. The market for powered tricycles was undoubtedly enormous. The Ghazi Empire's royal army alone needed thousands of them in its long-term plans. If his magic circle could be sold, he could earn a substantial royalty. Diesel's desk was the size of 2 ping-pong tables put together, piled with drawings and materials, surrounded by stationery and draft paper. They often gathered around to discuss issues. He pulled out a blueprint and said to Hakan, "This is the magic circle used in the tricycle's implosion mechanism." Hakan took a look and said, "It's very crude. Its efficiency and explosive power aren't very high." Frederick felt he was right. The most obvious sign was that Diesel's magic circle circuit was 3 mm wide and simple, while Hakan's was about 1 mm wide. The smaller the area, the more refined it could be. The magic circle operates on the principle that the moving magic elements within the magic circuits induct each other, transforming the virtual into the real. The more magic circuits within the same volume, the more induction points there are, resulting in greater efficiency and power. Diesel said, "Powered tricycles are characterized by their affordability, so the price of the implosion machine can't be too high." Hakan nodded. That was the truth. His magic circle didn't offer a price advantage over theirs. Thinner circuits meant more labor required to manufacture. Diesel continued, "Magic circles are prone to damage due to prolonged operation. Excessively complex ones require more skilled craftsmen, and repair costs are higher." Hakan realized he had overlooked this point. Previous magic circles weren't like the ones in engines that constantly bang, bang, bang and had explosive effects. They were essentially disposable, and no one considered repairing them. This made it clear to him that his magic circle, while technically sound, was too cost-effective to be used on a cheap power tricycle. Hakan immediately asked, "Can it be used in more expensive applications, where the user has both financial resources and technological expertise?" Diesel didn't answer immediately, but instead took a piece of scratch paper and began to calculate. Hakan glanced at it, barely understanding it. Diesel calculated for over 10 minutes, then looked up and said, "Your magic circle could theoretically be used in large engines, generating approximately 20% more power than our current designs, offering extremely high economic value." Hakan immediately asked, "What are the market prospects?" He had only recently learned the term from a newspaper. He had never considered such a thing before. The few things he had made were easily sold. Diesel glanced at Frederick, who half closed his eyes and nodded gently. He had too many too advanced achievements to display, so to accommodate Hakan, his office was filled with more common achievements, and the drawings were of commercially available products. After Frederick's gesture, Diesel said, "We are designing a 100 horsepower implosion engine. Because it does not require boiling water, it is smaller in size than a steam engine of the same horsepower. It does not require water, and there is no problem of steam discharge scalding people and objects." Hakan was shocked and immediately asked, "Does this mean that steam engines are outdated?" FATA placed an order for hundreds of high-horsepower steam engines at the World Expo not long ago, as well as a package of user training programs. If it is said that these things are now outdated, then there is a big problem. Diesel smiled wryly and said, "The steam engine is large because the boiler is filled with water. The implosion engine, though small, is made of steel and weighs a lot. The special wind blast technique is quite powerful. To withstand the prolonged bombardment, the material and thickness of the cylinder cannot be skimped on. This shortcoming is not obvious in low horsepower machines. As the power increases, the explosion becomes more violent, and the problem becomes exponentially more severe." Haken nodded and said, indeed, replacing it with a stronger magical metal would cost even more. He was well aware of the destructive power of wind magic. As the saying goes, dripping water wears away a stone. It follows that the cylinder, subjected to constant bombardment from morning till night, must be extremely strong, otherwise it would be easily damaged. This way, there would be no problem. High horsepower steam engines are low cost and lightweight, and the cylinders of the implosion engine are all cast in one piece, which would be difficult to transport. Frederick followed up, high-powered implosion machines are primarily used in mines with a water shortage. Haken, noticing a problem, asked, wouldn't it be difficult to move such a heavy machine up the mountain? He wondered if there was some way to reduce the machine's weight back in Wesson. Frederick replied, it's not difficult. Our mines use railcars to transport, or the machine is fixed to the car, which drives a winch. The machine then pulls the cable itself and slowly ascends. Haken thought about it, and it made sense. He'd ridden a train before, and it was indeed convenient for hauling things. As the saying goes, everything is different, and every industry is different. He wondered why it wasn't used as a locomotive. Diesel and Haken then discussed technical issues. Frederick went to the workshop. When he returned, Haken had already left. Someone would be in with him later to discuss a cooperation agreement. Frederick visited the workshop to learn about the development of a truly high-horsepower implosion engine. Sitting down at his desk, he asked Diesel, how do you plan to address the cylinder wall damage problem on the 200-horsepower implosion engine? Unlike the internal combustion engines back home, which only deal physical damage, the implosion engine is powered by magic and carries additional magical damage, making the problem more severe. A Cartesian damage versus time curve shows a critical point before which the problem is minimal, after which the damage rapidly increases. Diesel smiled wryly and said, the cylinder wall damage is only a minor issue. I plan to fix it by replacing the sleeve. The biggest problem right now is the crankshaft for the multi-cylinder engine. Due to precision issues, it vibrates violently at high speeds and can even break. Frederick could only smile wryly. The current crankshaft machining method is inherited from a small workshop in Pakistan back home, involving several processes such as forging, cutting, and lathes. However, the current machine tools and workers are far inferior to those of a 21st century workshop, so the machining accuracy is questionable. There's no way around it anytime soon. Frederick took a piece of scratch paper and started scribbling. I'm planning to install a large implosion engine on a ship. A low speed is acceptable. Lengthen both the stroke and crankshaft lever, making the stroke larger than the cylinder diameter, to reduce the speed and increase the torque. Diesel said, if it's to be installed on a ship, we have to reduce weight, which means we need to use high-strength materials, which will increase the cost. Frederick said, it's not a big deal. We have at least one engine on board, and one backup. Reliability is always the top priority. I'm planning to produce a batch of warships. You can go to the shipyard and learn about the mechanical operation of the flying tulip and make some targeted designs. As he spoke, he casually took a document that Diesel handed over and opened it. Wow. You know I'm short on money lately, Frederick said with an exaggerated grimace. Diesel had applied for investment to build an industrial park centered around an implosion engine factory. Diesel understood the situation and shared his thoughts. Frederick pondered this for a long moment before saying, I understand. I need the Executive Yuan and the Ministry of Commerce to investigate before making a decision. Someone will come to consult with you in the next couple of days. Be prepared. He had recently sold a lot of bonds, and now Diesel and his group were also considering the idea. However, the current bond market only had bonds issued by royal families and feudal lords. Merchant bonds, due to credit issues, were not widely recognized and were only sold privately. Diesel and his group wanted to sell their bonds publicly on the bond exchange, but this required careful research. Chapter 396 The Development Direction of Ships. At a regular high-level government meeting, Frederick characterized the factory's bond sale as a normal business practice and refrained from issuing further directives, simply directing the Ministry of Commerce to conduct a comprehensive survey of both buyers and sellers. Private transactions of corporate bonds and equity have long existed, and sooner or later they would have to be sold publicly. However, implementing relevant policies is not so simple, especially for something so unprecedented. Misconceptions could lead to something even more catastrophic than the tulip bubble. In his spare time, Frederick, mindful of his new warship, led his team to investigate the shipyard, where they encountered a significant setback. In the shipyard director's office, Director Bachner cautiously addressed Frederick. Sir, your warship design looks excellent, but its lifespan will be short. Bachner, both a shipyard director and an accomplished ship designer, was familiar with every detail of a vessel and could spot flaws in Frederick's design at a glance. Frustrated, Frederick could only sigh upon understanding the problem. He wanted to install the 75mm caliber goldenrod cannon used in the reconquest of Constantinople and the more recent war between the Grand Duke of Franconia and the Regents Confederation, known as the War of the Trade Route. The mechanical elevation and steering mechanisms were no problem. On his desk was a diagram of a coastal gunboat, displacing around 100 tons. Its layout was modeled after the gunboats of his homeland, featuring a 75mm caliber goldenrod cannon at the bow, flanked by 2 jet mortars capable of flat firing, and 3 pea-shaped Gatling guns. The problem was, however, that the recoil from the cannons was too great for the wooden hull. Every shot was a shock to the hull, and it would soon collapse from the unbearable force. The 5 river steamers equipped with the cannons that had sailed to the reconquest of Constantinople had experienced similar problems. Fortunately, they had only seen action in a few minor battles and were repaired and still functioning. Therefore, Baron Edition's ships, used to fight pirates, now all use jet mortars. To increase accuracy, they fire at close range, resulting in minimal recoil in a more bearable situation. Frederick, unfamiliar with inland river vessels, didn't include such technical details in his report, only general mentions of damage and repair. Fearing his superior's anger, Bachner continued, "Your Excellency's ship design has greatly inspired me. The use of engines and the abandonment of masts has resulted in a much simpler hull, and the superstructure improves the spatial layout." Frederick simply smiled, having already offered this compliment when designing the flying tulip. "Large caliber cannons are a historical trend," he said. "I've heard someone in the Kingdom of England is designing a warship with 10 or more jet cannons mounted behind the side portholes. Magic airguns have been sold for years, and many have copied them, with some success. However, the cost and quality of airguns are inferior to those from Wesson, so it's better to buy them than to make them. However, since jet cannons aren't available on the market, they can only be manufactured." Frederick continued, "The ships of the future will inevitably be all steel structures, but it is too early now. We can start with small boats with steel keels and wooden hulls. The problem of artillery recoil can be considered starting with a design of steel keel ships to disperse the recoil instead of just acting on the deck. Now we need a batch of offshore gunboats of about 100 tons to deal with the increasing number of pirate attacks in the north of the Rhine Confederation." Bachner understood what Frederick meant. He is now leading the Navy Minister who is about to become the Rhine Confederation. He has the political goal of protecting the coast, has proposed the direction of future ship discoveries, and has even come up with a concept map of a warship. It is obvious that he is determined to do it. Such a warship must be designed from scratch. He wasted no time in discussing it and quickly got to work. Using steel for the keel raises many issues, such as weight distribution, and there's no precedent for processing, so a lot of experimentation is needed. Frederick, having interacted with them frequently, had already caught on to the underlying message and said, "Send a report if the funding for the experiments is insufficient." Designing a steel keel from scratch would require a significant amount of technological advancement, as would the steel mill and heavy machinery plant. A dedicated processing plant would also need to be built at the shipyard, all of which would require a significant investment. Frederick wasn't omniscient. He didn't even know the 3 types of hull frames in the shipbuilding industry: transverse, longitudinal, and hybrid. He was completely clueless about the design method of first developing principles, then specifying specifics, gradually deepening and approaching the design. Fortunately, he had a crude industrial and research system that had taken him 10 years to build, and he had the money. He only needed to point out a direction, and someone would follow suit, eliminating the need for him to personally investigate, as he had done with crucible steel making and bearings. Just as Frederick and Bachner were discussing the feasibility of the torpedo, the office suddenly went dark. BASF. Frederick looked towards the door. "If you don't lose weight you won't be able to get in. You know, the railway gave me an application a while ago. You have to buy a ticket for 2 seats. Vanessa came with Frederick today as a secretary. Her husband Schmidt and BASF are classmates. They often visit each other's homes. She also joked at this time, he stays with slime every day, and his body has become like slime." BASF is now one of the richest people in the state of Wesson. After his family became rich, He gradually ate like a ball and was often teased by his friends. He just smiled, but Frederick said seriously, "You can't do that. You need to lose weight, or you'll get sick as you get older." BASF feigned resignation. "I want to lose weight, too, but I can't." Vanessa teased him. "Who told you to always say you need to eat a full stomach to have the energy to lose weight?" Bachner jokingly added, "We have a skilled butcher in the cafeteria. Why don't you have him cut off your fat? Our doctors are very skilled too, and they'll sew it up right away, and it won't be a problem." No, 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 BASF shook his head hastily. "If you do that, forget about moth-proofing paint." Frederick raised an eyebrow and asked, "Is it the kind used on ship bottoms?" He had used a lot of paint in his past life, but he had no idea how to make it, so even if he wanted to develop a new product, he had no idea where to start. BASF explained that he had been working on developing a slime-based paint for the past few years. It was actually a colored film that was not only colorful but also waterproof and rust-resistant. It could already be used on furniture, cardboard boxes, and iron railings. Last year, BASF, mindful of the high demands of wooden boats for waterproofing and mildew resistance, visited the shipyard to promote its products. Bachner commissioned him to research a moth-proofing coating for ship bottoms. BASF's team brought in 2 wooden stakes the size of 2 men's legs. One was covered in barnacles, while the other was coated in a dark red film that looked quite smooth. The effect was immediately apparent, needing no further explanation. Bachner knelt nearby, touched the wood coated with a moth-proofing film, and asked, "Is the coating strong?" BASF replied, "It has a strong bond with the wood, but it certainly won't withstand impact and friction." Frederick, crouching nearby, said, "Why not try a 3-ply glue, 2-ply fabric coating, like barred water pipes, or perhaps add short fibers for added strength?" Bachner replied, "We could try that. Another benefit of this coating is that applying it to the ship bottom effectively prevents water leaks between the planks." Frederick, knowing they had something else to discuss, left the room alone and asked the others to take him on a tour of the factory grounds, intending to see the flying tulip undergoing renovations. Just then, an urgent telegram arrived. Chapter 397 You should do some things. That woman is truly outrageous. The nearly 90-year-old Grand Duke of Mainz angrily slammed the armrest of the sofa. How could she do such a thing? I knew those Gauls had bad intentions. Beside him, Maria patted his back repeatedly, whispering, "Godfather, don't let yourself get sick with anger. It's not worth it." The Grand Duke of Mainz heeded Maria's advice, sighed, and said, "Bring me a bottle of wine." Maria went to the side and poured him and Frederick a cup of tea. Frederick sat on the sofa opposite, the helmet he had worn when he rode back at Ron still lying beside him, several letters in his hands. He read them and said expressionlessly, "Our crown princess is truly a genius." The Grand Duke of Mainz snorted, his face darkening. After reading the letter from Cologne, Frederick leaned back on the sofa, closed his eyes, and rhythmically tapped his fingers on the armrest, thinking. The Helvetic Federation lies southwest of the Rhine Confederation, across the lake from the Duchy of Mainz. To its east lies the westernmost tip of the Osmagian Empire, to its northwest and west lies the Kingdom of Gaul, and to its south lies the Kingdom of Sardinia. It covers approximately 40,000 square kilometers and has a population of over 1 million, with tens of thousands of people making their living in the canton of Wesson. Its topography is unique, mountainous areas to the north and south, bordered by a fertile river valley in the middle. Both sides of the valley are flanked by large lakes 60 to 70 kilometers long and over 10 kilometers wide, making the terrain easily defendable and difficult to attack. Beyond the narrow river valley, the mountainous areas to the north and south are barren and inhospitable, teeming with bears and mercenaries. The capital is known as Bear City, and the national emblem features a black bear. Despite its numerous mountains, the region lacks common mineral resources, with only barely sufficient iron and coal mines for domestic use. The only mineral available for export is some mineral salt. The White Mountains to the south are rich in wind and ice crystals. The Helvetic Federation's political system is unique in this world. The king is elected by the nation's 26 earls and is prohibited from re-election. Now aging and with only mediocre children, the king, determined to maintain his dignity and allow other families to perform a favor, announced his abdication at the beginning of the year, on Harvest Day, and held a vote for a new king. The other 25 families immediately sprang into action, engaging in the usual charade of alliances, exchanging favors, and waiting for a price. Previously, they had played it safe, But this year presented a new challenge. The Kingdom of Gaul was preparing to invade the south, and naturally needed a neighbor to align with them, so the Gauls sought a proxy. The Kingdom of Sardinia, seeing the Gauls as intent on an attack, dispatched troops northward while also seeking a proxy within the Helvetic Confederation to prevent the northern border from being left open. Some, convinced they wouldn't follow the rules, sent representatives to the Rhine Confederation for assistance. Then came the trouble. Grand Duke Mainz said angrily, "I've been operating that secret line for over 30 years. The first was to build a railway to the border of the Helvetic Confederation to increase foreign trade revenue. The second was to get him to ask us for aid so we could infiltrate their internal affairs, and now, that woman, with just one word, has that fool Rudolf dismissed the envoy." Frederick opened his eyes and sighed. Grand Duke Mainz wanted to obtain full authority through the royal family and had already negotiated with the capital. Rudolf, following the advice of his ministers, was about to agree, but Antonia privately told him that the Helvetic Confederation had its own national conditions and that any intervention by other countries was likely a lie by a small group of conspirators. Any involvement by the Confederation of the Rhine would have a very negative impact. Between the envoy and his wife, Rudolf chose to believe his wife. Meanwhile, an even more serious incident occurred in the capital. His Majesty William, beloved by all the people, was in a coma. Rudolf, after rejecting the envoy, was concerned only about his father's condition. Frederick frowned and asked, "Is it possible that your Majesty's condition is causing this?" The Grand Duke of Mainz said grimly, "There's no evidence at this point. While the timing is a coincidence, anything could have happened with your Majesty's illness for so many years. If the Rhine Confederation agrees to the request of the Helvetic Confederation nobles to intervene in the throne election, it will be a great training opportunity for Rudolf. It will also signal that the Rhine Confederation has become a country with a voice, indicating that we have fully emerged from the shadow of our defeat 11 years ago." He sighed deeply at this point. In 1023, the Rhine Confederation suffered a crushing defeat in the Low Countries, completely losing face and dignity. At the time, Frederick was preoccupied with preserving his own territory and did not feel the external pressure that the Grand Duke of Mainz did. In 1027, the Rhine Confederation defeated a surprise attack by the combined forces of the Piast and Danish kingdoms at the Battle of the Elbe. Frederick, with his 8 million men defeating 100,000 and the Danish king Valdemar in battle, halted the Rhine Confederation's decline with these tremendous military victories, and the external situation began to improve. In 1034, the World's Fair showcased Frederick's formidable wealth to the world. The Grand Duke of Mainz continued, "Militarily, economically, and politically, you have restored the Rhine Confederation's reputation, and our internal morale has been greatly boosted." Rank and Shakespeare wanted to cultivate Rudolf's political abilities, to balance the military and economic deficits. "They also hinted to me that your offspring might marry into the royal family to strengthen ties." Alice, the Grand Duke of Mainz sighed in disappointment. The Rhine Confederation had regained its military confidence after the Battle of the Elbe, leading to the stunning victory of the Noble Coalition in capturing Lindenberg a few months earlier. Politically, the previous secret assistance to the Kingdom of Luxembourg in successfully driving out the Kingdom of Gaul had restored confidence among the nobles of the Rhine Confederation in foreign policy, but this was not easily publicized. The Helvetic Confederation's campaign for the throne could serve as a model project. The Grand Duke of Mainz added, "Everything is already prepared in the capital. After I successfully lead this effort and the Rhine Confederation gains prestige, everyone will work together to prepare for the eastward crossing of the Elbe." Frederick shook his head helplessly. Rudolf's strength was his willingness to listen to advice, but his weakness was his willingness to listen to anyone. It was clear that Antonia's role in marrying into the Rhine Confederation was to hinder its progress. Otherwise, Rudolf would not have directly rejected the envoys, but would have chosen a more prudent approach, allowing the Grand Duke of Mainz to act according to circumstances, taking advantage of opportunities and fleeing if they were scams. Frederick pondered, "It seems we won't be able to see the Cooperation Cup this year." The three leaders of the upstream cooperation organization would organize a single-round football match during their meeting, and everyone was having a good time. Now, the Grand Duke of Baden was in the Osmagian Empire, awaiting Ona's coronation. With Her Majesty William in a coma, the Grand Duke of Mainz needed to come to the capital to oversee the affairs of the Helvetic Confederation. The Grand Duke of Mainz asked, "How far can you confidently achieve?" Frederick replied helplessly, "I'm not sure either. Politically, returning to the way things were would be a success, But that's not very likely, the Grand Duke of Mainz also said helplessly. At least we can contain the Kingdom of Gaul. The Helvetic Confederation had become a diplomatic battleground between the Kingdom of Gaul and the Kingdom of Sardinia. The former bordered the Rhine Confederation, while the latter was separated by the White Mountains, which was occupied by the Osmagian Empire. It was obvious who should be contained. Furthermore, the Helvetic Confederation was right next to the Duchy of Mainz. If the Kingdom of Gaul declared war on the Rhine Confederation, and the Gauls attacked the Helvetic Confederation's river valleys instead of the lowlands, the Grand Duke of Mainz would be the first to suffer. Frederick added, the only leverage I have is economic. For example, we could build a railway there. The Grand Duke of Mainz sipped his tea slowly, then pondered for a moment. According to your theory that the economic base determines the superstructure, this is a good idea. As long as they agree, we can build it from the train station in Trouthaven along the lakeshore. Frederick nodded. The Grand Duke of Mainz asked, when will you be there? I'll make some preparations. Frederick thought for a moment and said, I'll go under the guise of business. Let's keep it quiet and say it's market research to avoid raising alarm. The Grand Duke of Mainz nodded. Gaul and Sardinia were national teams, while his own was merely a civilian force. It was best to keep a low profile. Alice, the Grand Duke of Mainz said, trying to stand with his cane. Maria and Frederick quickly went to support him. The Grand Duke of Mainz whispered to Frederick, there are things Rudolph can't do. You should do it. Chapter 398 Taking the train on a business trip. October, the north winds picked up, and the weather in Wessenberg cooled, prompting people to change into winter clothing. Early in the morning, Frederick, dressed in a blacksmith's uniform, a trendy outfit in other parts of the country, with a thick sweater and trousers underneath, a black woolen hat so loose it could pass for a terrorist, high-top leather boots, a large backpack, and a weapons case, lined up in the square in front of the train station outside Wessenberg. The morning and evening temperatures were freezing, the concrete had stopped hardening, and construction sites were gradually halting. The Helvetians who had come to Wessenberg to work were also returning home for the winter, hoping to return next spring. Frederick, unprepared for the spring festival travel rush to become the spring and autumn travel rush, ordered the Ministry of Railways to arrange special trains to transport the workers. The Ministry of Railways was now managed by Albert, the youngest son of the Grand Duke of Mainz. He had originally come to Wessenberg to pursue Katharina, the youngest daughter of Beecher, the god of burning magic. His romantic interests were unsuccessful, but he later dedicated himself to the railways and achieved excellent results. Frederick, recognizing his talent and hard work, promoted him. The railway had been completely blank before. After receiving advice from Frederick, Albert used his intelligence and wisdom to build a well-organized railway system in just a few years. Frederick is now a new employee of the Ministry of Railways, and he was sent on a business trip in the cold weather. He followed the team slowly forward and soon came to the bronze statue in the middle of the square. This bronze statue was designed by him and built to thank the Helvetia people for their contribution to the construction of the railway. The statue is two men in blacksmith clothes, one wearing the traditional short-brimmed felt hat of the Helvetia Federation, and the other a local wearing a construction site safety helmet. The two men happily clinked the bottles in their hands together, and it seemed that they were about to drink from the bottles in the next moment. This bronze statue is of great significance to the Helvetia people working in the Wesson state, representing that the Wesson people regard them as brothers, not mercenary captives many years ago. The train station was bustling with people, a frequent target for petty theft. Patrols armed with shields, hollow steel batons, and air revolvers, accompanied by police dogs, passed by the lines from time to time. A loud voice constantly reminded people to keep an eye on their wallets. Even in such a situation, some were fearless. A sudden roar erupted from the line on the other side of the statue. A thin young man, his speed suggesting skill, ran toward Frederick. Before Frederick could react, whistles rang out. Many of the Helvetii in the queue drew their carrying poles and formed into a formation of 3 or 5, firing their weapons. The thief drew a palm-length dagger from his bosom, swung it a few times, and snarled fiercely, "Get away if you don't want to die." Many of the Helvetia had been renowned mountain mercenaries before joining the construction site. They had seen a lot of things, and seeing the thief with his weapon only intensified their excitement. Someone rushed out from behind the thief and struck him in the back of the head with a carrying pole. Hearing the sound of breaking wind behind him, the thief immediately turned and blocked with his dagger, but another carrying pole was thrown like a javelin, striking him on the shoulder. The dagger failed to block the blow. What happened next was predictable. The thief was beaten with clubs, causing his father and grandfather to scream in pain. Finally, the police, seeing that the beating was almost over, arrived and shouted, "Stop it! Stop it! You'll be fined if you stain the floor with blood." The police took down the participant's name and company affiliation, then carried the thief away, saying that the certificate would be delivered to his company first. The line continued forward, finally reaching Frederick. The security officer was stunned when he saw him. After checking his ID and discovering he was from the Railway Bureau, he became more friendly. While checking his luggage, he said, "You're the only one not carrying a load today." "I'm a little confused," Frederick said helplessly. "I wanted to carry a load, but the boss wouldn't let me, saying it would tarnish their image." The Helvetii didn't take their wages directly home. Instead, they bought large quantities of cloth, clothing, daily necessities, and food. Frederick saw some bringing back Fujiang flour and potatoes from the seed company. The railway introduced standard-sized baskets, limiting each person to 2 baskets in addition to their backpacks. They also introduced special weapon boxes for carrying weapons. The weapons were locked in the boxes, and the keys were only available at the train station, allowing access when entering or leaving the station. Frederick's luggage was substantial, with a bottom layer filled with white tissues and 3 boxes of his usual medicine. The security officer saw him and said, "You've been ripped off. While tissues are easy to sell, you'd make more money if you brought more medicine." Frederick, figuring he was just carrying some goods on a business trip, a common occurrence among train employees, said nothing. After passing security, Frederick arrived at the waiting hall, which resembled the bus station back home. A section of the waiting hall had been reserved for the special train bound for Trouthaven, the closest point to the Helvetic Confederation. Passengers from the previous train were arriving, and Frederick's train was due in half an hour. The shortest route from Wessenland to Trouthaven was over 200 kilometers, but the railway took a long detour through the Duchy of Mainz, covering about 500 kilometers and taking over 10 hours, including stops. Frederick didn't bring much food with him, so upon arriving at the platform, he bought some Wesson buns, braised eggs, braised chicken legs, and some happy water. He also bought a box of exorbitantly expensive cream sandwich cookies, which he carried to the green-painted carriage. Today's train had been modified. The seats on both sides had been removed in half, leaving space for the passengers across the aisle to store their luggage. 2 stacked baskets fit perfectly. Frederick had secured a window seat at the rear. Only 4 of the 6 facing seats were occupied, with 2 reserved for nuts, candy beans, happy water, newspapers, magazines, playing cards, and the conductor to rest. Of the other 3 passengers, the one next to Frederick was the oldest, his beard already graying. The young man across from him looked to be in his early 20s and immediately took a look at a construction worker's handbook. The other man, in his 30s, had a facial scar. They all wore different styles of blacksmith uniforms and felt hats. The people in the carriage were quite energetic when they first got on the train, and many of them started chatting. The man with the flower beard asked Frederick, "You are not a Helvetic, are you?" Frederick took out cream sandwich biscuits and asked everyone to eat together, and replied in Helvetic, "I work on the railway, and I'm on a business trip to the Helvetic Federation." The man with the flower beard thanked him for the biscuits and asked, "Oh, are you going to build a railway there?" Frederick nodded and replied, "Duke Wesson is planning to build a railway there, from Trout Harbor south around the southern shore of Lake Constance, and then along the river valley west to Lake Geneva." The other 2 were immediately attracted by his words, and Scarface asked a little excitedly, "Is this true?" Frederick replied, "Duke Wesson does have such an idea. We have to go and see the Rhine along the way to see if it is feasible, and then negotiate with the lords. If the Rhine Alliance wants to intervene in the internal affairs of the Helvetic Federation, it has to find a good starting point. The railway is a good introduction. It can change the local economic and military structure, and it is not unfamiliar to the locals, enough to attract the attention of the nobles." "That's great." Scarface was a little excited. "Our master has long wanted to build a railway out of the mountains. He even asked me about it, and he definitely agrees. Your Excellency must come to our place. The master will definitely welcome you. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 399 And I won't help anyone. Frederick had thought that since so many Helvetics had built railways, the locals would be familiar with them and would likely be receptive to them. However, he hadn't expected those people to actually tell their families and fellow villagers about the railways after returning home, and they were quite exaggerated. They boasted about things like, when the whistle blows, gold coins will flow, and wherever the train can reach, stones can be sold as gold. Not only did Scarface speak passionately, but even Flowerbird mysteriously hinted that Duke Wesson was planning to build an underground railway specifically to transport gold back to the castle's vault. Frederick's mouth twitched, remembering that he had indeed mentioned the concept of a subway when he visited Oak City a few years ago, but that was only in a joking tone and there was no need for it now. Curious, he asked, since these nobles all know the benefits of railways, why don't they build them? The young man reading across from him answered, Your Excellency, I'm sure you understand that construction costs need to account for labor, materials, and machinery. Frederick nodded, he had come up with it himself. The young man continued, labor costs aren't a problem. We can rent machinery, but the rail material is too expensive. Frederick understood. The rails used in the Wesson Canton Railway were purchased directly from the factory, without middlemen taking a cut. The price was never publicly disclosed. Even Scarface, a veteran of 8 years of rail construction, didn't know the price. For veterans of the railway, discerning steel quality was fundamental. They applied the price of fine swords forged by blacksmiths to the rails, naturally coming up with an outrageous price. Frederick thought for a moment. Rail prices weren't exactly secret. Not only in the nearby Duchy of Mainz in Bavaria, but also as far away as the Orange Island in the Inland Sea, they knew the price. He added a 30% markup to the price he was selling to the Duchy of Mainz and told them nonchalantly. So cheap? Flowerbird was incredulous. Did you mistake gold for silver? Frederick smiled and said, This is a bulk deal. We're not buying just 1 or 2 bars. We're ordering over 10 kilometers, so it's naturally cheaper. Flowerbird thought it made sense. Scarface finished another cream-filled biscuit and said excitedly, Please do come to us, Count Sylvan. I'm sure you'll welcome him. Frederick recalled the intelligence the Grand Duke of Mainz had provided him. The Sylvan family's territory lay in the mountains to the north, where swift rivers and numerous reefs made water transport impossible, forcing them to travel only by mountain roads. This presented a dilemma. The planned railway would only be built in the gentle river valleys, with branch lines extending only to the foot of the mountains, making it inexpensive. However, going into the mountains would be a real hassle. Scarface calculated how many roads would be needed to connect the castle to the outside world, how much would need widening, the labor and materials required, and the cost of renting machinery. He concluded that if the current Duke of Sylvan only had to eat grass daily and not buy new clothes, he could afford the money in 10 years. Frederick glanced at him. This man's calculations were precise and his thinking was clear. He was undoubtedly no ordinary man. A man with a flowery beard beside him said, Count Sforza, where I come from, also lives in the mountains. There's an abundance of snow wool there, it's the finest wool in the world. I heard Duke Wesson's sweaters are made of it. The roads there are difficult to travel, and there are many bears along the way. Small caravans could be eaten by them. Steam locomotives provide safety. Frederick reviewed Count Sforza's information. He was a powerful figure in the southern mountains. His territory had some mines, a thriving handicraft industry, and he was loud and vocal. Rumors even circulated that he was a candidate for the throne this year. Frederick nodded. A local leader like that deserved a visit. He then asked the young man across from him, Would you also like to live on the railway line in your hometown? The young man replied, My family is on the eastern shore of Lake Geneva in the far west. We have some money, and a few years ago my parents sent me to study at the University of Wessenberg. I don't have any magical talent, so I went to the School of Civil Engineering. Frederick nodded. He was a civil engineer, and he felt a little more favorable towards him. The young man continued, I have a little doubt. The Helvetic Federation has rarely been invaded by foreign enemies due to its terrain. After the railway is built, the terrain advantage will disappear, and foreign enemies can come in through the railway. If the war breaks out, my family's property will be burned down. I have to consider this issue. Frederick nodded. This is indeed a very realistic problem. I have this opinion on this matter. Since the other party was a college student, he spoke more profoundly. Duke Wesson said that war is a continuation of politics, and the foundation of politics is economics. We can analyze this from an economic perspective. To be blunt, the Helvetic Federation has nothing economically worth fighting with its neighbors. At the recent World Expo, all they had to offer was cheese and some magic crystals from the mountains. Among the Helvetic Federation's neighbors, the Kingdom of Gaul possesses vast farmland to the north, the Kingdom of Sardinia benefits from inland sea trade, the Osmana Empire is only adjacent to the White Mountains, and their focus has never been on the west. The Rhine Confederation only focuses on its homeland east of the Elbe. No country would want to invade the Helvetic Federation, that would be a losing proposition. After he finished speaking, the seat fell silent. The young man opposite sighed and said, "Your words are indeed hurtful, but they are true, but there's nothing wrong with the cheese. My cheese sells very well. You can try it when you get there." Frederick smiled and nodded. The man with the flowery beard shook his head and said, "I don't quite understand the big principles. I've fought in many battles in my life and seen many nobles launch wars for inexplicable reasons. Some were fighting to get a knight with a courtesan, while others simply felt offended by the other party's gaze." Frederick nodded. While such incidents were common, they were small-scale conflicts with few casualties. Their mercenaries were mostly just for show, far less so than wars between nations. He said, "I've looked at the map. The only places in the Helvetic Confederation with access to the railway are the eastern and western shores of Lake Constance and Lake Geneva. The White Mountains lie just off the water, and the terrain is narrow." The three nodded. Frederick continued. "From a military point of view, as long as we build a group of fortresses in a dangerous place and maintain a small fleet of some size on the lake, we can keep the enemy out. As long as the Helvetic Federation makes itself a hedgehog, the surrounding countries will not target it." Scarface smiled and said, "That's true. Hedgehogs are covered with thorns and don't have much meat. Wolves and foxes are unwilling to eat them unless they are extremely hungry." The young man opposite said again, "But this won't solve some problems. I received a letter from home saying that the domestic situation this year is very bad. Some people want to help the Kingdom of Gaul, and some people want to help the Kingdom of Sardinia. If they fight, my family's property will be finished." Frederick smiled disdainfully and said, "How much money did they give? Did the Kingdom of Gaul agree to return the city of Lemon on the other side of Lake Geneva? Did the Kingdom of Sardinia propose to return Mount Bray? If they don't even have this little sincerity, is it necessary for me to work for them?" The three men felt as if they had been stabbed in the heart. Both locations had been lost within decades. Lemon was the western gateway, and Mount Bray was the southern window. With their loss, the Helvetic Confederation was trapped within the mountains and lakes. Frederick pulled a bag of fragrant roasted pine nuts from his pocket and offered them to eat, but none of the three took action. His action this time was to sever the hand extended by the kingdoms of Gaul and Sardinia. Opening up the wounds was a good way to inflict mutual damage. Alice, Flowerbeard sighed, "Then what do you say we should do? We can't afford to offend either side." Frederick shrugged and said, "That's simple. They are actually all afraid that the Helvetic Federation will help the other side. As long as the Helvetic Federation announces that it will not help anyone in the future, that's all." Scarface asked him, "Then what if someone comes to attack us?" "That's easy," Frederick said. "Just sign an agreement with the 4 neighboring countries separately, saying that when others attack you in the future, I will not help your enemies, and you come to help us when we are attacked. Whichever neighboring country wants to attack the Helvetic Federation alone, it needs to consider the attitudes of the other 3 countries. That's easy. As long as the Helvetic Federation is not stupid enough to anger all the neighboring countries at once, or foolishly pulls out all the quills of the hedgehog, no one will attack. Of course, this kind of thing will probably cost a price." Frederick kept paying attention to the expressions of the 3 people when he said this. One of them was a veteran, one was a calculating middle-aged man, and one was a young intellectual who could represent the views of a large number of people. If the 3 men didn't object, he planned to have the Grand Duke Mainz's undercover agents spread these rumors once they arrived in the Helvetic Confederation. "Hey," Flowerbird suddenly shook his head. "Those are the gentleman's concerns. Let's drink." "That's right." Scarface glanced at the front of the carriage. "Why hasn't that cart arrived yet?" "I'll go get some wine." He stood up and left. The young man also stood up and said, "I'll get some snacks." Flowerbird saw this and stood up and left, saying, "Hey, I ordered the drinks. How can I let them buy them?" Soon after, the 3 of them arrived with their shopping carts. They each had 2 bottles of beer. That's all the cart had left: a platter of braised pork head, a platter of braised pork offal, a dish of braised tofu skin, and pickled cucumbers. They also received a few long toothpicks to eat with, totaling over 100 copper coins. The three of them wanted to split the bill, but Frederick insisted. Finally, Scarface did the math and realized that everyone had just eaten Frederick's cream sandwich cookies, so the three of them would each have 30 copper coins, and Frederick would make up the last change. Chapter 400. Many people agree. Want to stay at the hotel? We have hot water. Yes, I'll buy you the boat tickets. We have a big room, big enough for the whole family. Frederick, reeking of alcohol, exited the train station. The exit was crowded, and after going to security to open his weapons case, the three drinking buddies from the train disappeared. The man with the flowery beard was a bit overly generous. After a few drinks, he ran to the dining car and brought back 2 cases of beer. Then he had some wine, explaining that his children could support themselves, that the grave and coffin had been prepared 10 years ago, and that he could spend whatever money he had. At the end of his drinking, he even asked the young man to marry his daughter to him, and asked the 2 people next to him to be witnesses. Frederick and Scarface joined in the fun. Frederick touched his pocket watch to check the time, but it was empty, and he suddenly sobered up. The pocket watch case was crafted by Frederick in his spare time. It looked like ordinary steel, but it was actually made from the horseshoe once used by Dawn. Its pattern was emblazoned on the front, and the cord was made from its reins. The dial was a transparent crystal glass, revealing the gears within, giving it a distinctly industrial aesthetic. A merchant had offered it 2,000 florins, only to receive get out. Frederick pondered this. Shortly before getting off the train, the young man had agreed to visit Flowerbird's daughter. He had given the pocket watch to the young man at his own whim, saying it would be a token of love if he fell in love with him. Frederick, thinking this was irrelevant, considered the young man a student at the University of Wessenland. He considered it a gesture of care from the president and went on to find a place to live. Trout Harbor had a long history. Fishing had been practiced there since time immemorial, and it later developed into a hub for water trade in and out of the Helvetic Confederation. The arrival of the railway 2 years ago further boosted its development. The train station is right next to the Trout Harbor. Across from the passenger platform is the freight platform, and next to it is the road leading to the pier on Lake Constance, just over 300 meters away. The town is right next to the pier, a short walk away. It's peak season, and hotels are packed. Fishermen have even converted their houses into ghost houses, with families staying in their fishing boats by the pier. The scenery here is beautiful, making it a great summer escape. Many nobles of the Duchy of Mainz own lakeside villas in the suburbs, and wealthy merchants have also built small houses along the lakeside promenade. Frederick arrived at a small building and rang the doorbell according to the agreed-upon signal. The door quickly opened, revealing a burly man. Frederick whispered, "I'm selling these Cugic tapestries. Would you like to buy one?" The man replied, "Yes, I do. Do you have a blue one?" He then stepped aside to let Frederick in. The first floor of the house was filled with beds. Several sturdy men were already awake, weapons in hand, ready to attack if the arrival hadn't been one of their own. Frederick took off his hat, and upon recognizing the newcomer, they immediately saluted respectfully. This was a semi-public outpost of the Wessenland Railway Construction Group. Countless people in the Helvetic Federation were proud to work for this company. Their word carried more weight among the people than anyone else in the Rhine Confederation. Their help was essential for achieving success in the Helvetic Federation. The next morning, Frederick awoke and opened his bedroom window overlooking the lake. The lake shimmered before him, and sailboats carrying migrant workers sailed across it. In the distance to the left, snow-capped mountains rose. Many who couldn't wait for the boats had walked around the base of the mountains. The scenery was beautiful, and everything seemed so beautiful. Someone outside the door heard the window open and brought in breakfast. The person in charge now is Bellbach's deputy, Lehman. She is the daughter of an impoverished noble family. Her father was captured in Wessenland. When she and her mother arrived to retrieve him, they found him dead, mortally wounded. Having run out of money, they were forced to work at a railroad construction site, cooking and washing clothes for the prisoners. During this time, someone attempted to rape Lehman, but Bellbach, still carrying rails, intervened and rescued her. Breakfast was simple: bread, sausage, milk, and cheese. Frederick took a bite of the cheese and exclaimed in surprise, "This cheese tastes good." Lehman replied, "It's royal cheese, from the ranches of the current royal family, the Jekins, on the eastern shore of Lake Geneva." Frederick frowned, sensing something was amiss. but he couldn't pinpoint what. After breakfast, he went to the second floor study and repeated his story from the train yesterday. Lehman asked in surprise, "Are we really going to build the railway back?" Frederick replied, "I do, but I'm not sure what they're thinking." Lehman immediately said, "We all know the benefits of railways. We've privately thought about building one back home, making it easier to get in and out of the mountains. His Majesty the King and many nobles share this idea. His Majesty privately asked about it a few years ago, as did Count Baramy, Count Sforza, and old Count Sylvan. They were the most enthusiastic, but at the time, we were busy working in the domain and couldn't spare the time, so the landlady politely declined." Frederick nodded and asked for the map. Upon seeing it, Frederick smiled and said, "It seems you've been very well prepared." He had simply wanted to understand the specific locations of the nobles who had inquired about the railway and their relationships to each other. Unexpectedly, Lehman brought a map of the Helvetic Commonwealth Railway. However, the map lacked information like the map number or the compiler. It was an informal, private drawing. Lehman said sheepishly, "It was just some random chat over drinks, and I drew it for fun." Frederick asked, "Are there any nobles who oppose it?" "Some," Lehman replied, pointing to the map. "Mainly the Stefani family in the valley. They think the railway will affect their shipping business." Frederick looked at the map. The Stefani family and other opposition groups were located in the heart of the Helvetic Federation, while the supporters were mostly in the mountainous areas. He thought for a moment, and decided to let them resolve the issue internally. The worst that could happen was that the lands of the families who agreed to build the railway would grow munitions. Frederick asked again, "How many of you can work with me now?" Lehman replied, "I've selected 120 men after receiving the order. They're all capable, competent, and well-respected people from their hometowns. They're scattered around town." Frederick said, "Pleased, Lehman, you've done a great job. You deserve a raise." Only 5 days had passed since the order to recruit personnel was issued yesterday. Selecting and recruiting the entire Western railway construction system in such a short period of time at the start of a long holiday was no easy task. Without cell phones to keep in touch, some people might even be stopped at the train station or even called back. Lehman's face flushed with excitement at the compliment. Frederick pondered the map for a moment, then said, "Arrange for groups of 6 to come here for an hour-long interview with me. Then, get back to work." Lehman was efficient, and the first group arrived half an hour later. These people were all junior management personnel at Wessenland Railway Construction, including team leaders, construction workers, and budgeters. Because of their high salaries, they spoke loudly back home. Even the village chief had to toast them. Frederick spent 20 minutes asking about their work and lives, asking if they had been owed wages this year and what they had bought for their families. He then simplified his remarks from the train and told them to be careful on their way home to see if a road could be built to their hometown. Finally, he gave each of them 3 gold coins as a treat. Frederick spent 3 full days conversing with them, gaining valuable information, such as the frequent landslides in certain areas and the need for bridge repairs. On the 4th day, he had Lehman hire a small boat to sail to the Helvetic Federation. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.